The phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday in October, and Dorothy Calloway almost did not answer it. She was already in bed with the lamp off, lying on her back in the dark the way she had learned to sleep after Raymond passed, arms at her sides, breathing slow and deliberate, working at unconsciousness the way a person worked at a stubborn knot. The nightstand clock threw a faint red glow across the ceiling. The house settled around her, joists creaking in the cold like old bones. Outside, the wind moved through the oak trees at the edge of the yard, and the sound of it was the loneliest sound she knew. The phone rang again. Dot reached for it without turning on the light. 30 years of night shifts in an emergency room had wired her body to respond before her mind finished waking up. Her hand found the receiver on the third ring, and she brought it to her ear, already sitting up, feet already finding the floor. "Calloway," she said. The word came out low and practiced, the voice of a woman who had answered emergency calls in the dark so many times that the dark itself held no particular authority over her anymore. The voice on the other end was young, female, shaking in the way voices shook when the person holding them had been carrying too much for too long, and the weight had finally started to slip. "Mrs. Calloway, my name is Jessica Mercer. I am a caseworker with Tennessee Child Protective Services. I am so sorry to call at this hour." Dot was already on her feet, moving toward the closet. She pulled the chain on the overhead light. The small bedroom flooded, yellow and sharp. "What happened?" she said. Not a question, a statement that made room for whatever came next. "There is a child," Jessica said. "A little girl. She was admitted to Memphis General Hospital about 2 hours ago. Her name is Lily Briggs. She is 8 years old." Dot found her jeans on the closet hook, her flannel shirt on the chair by the window. She pulled the phone between her shoulder and her ear and started dressing. "What are her injuries?" The young woman's voice broke slightly at the edges. "Cigarette burns on her upper back, 4 distinct marks. Fractured left wrist, bruising across her ribs consistent with blunt force. Mild malnutrition." The emergency room physician filed a mandatory abuse report. Who brought her in? Her legal guardian, a man named Cole Hargrove. He is a deputy with Shelby County. Dot stopped with one boot in her hand. The name meant nothing to her. The title did. The combination of those two things, a badge and a child with cigarette burns, told her something about the shape of the trouble she was being called into. "Why are you calling me?" she said. "I am in Nashville. I have not practiced medicine in 4 years. Your name is listed in Lily's emergency contact file. You are listed as Secondary Emergency Contact Priority 2 behind her grandfather." Dot sat on the edge of the bed. She held the boot in her lap. Secondary Emergency Contact. She had not known that, had not known it was possible for her name to appear in a file belonging to a child she had never met. "Whose file is this again?" she said. "Lily Briggs. Her grandfather's name is listed as primary contact, but we cannot reach him. He is not answering his phone." "Who listed me as secondary contact?" "There is a notation here from 6 years ago. The woman who filed it was Margaret Briggs, the child's great-grandmother. She died 18 months ago." Dot sat very still. Outside, the oak trees moved in the wind. The clock on the nightstand said 11:52. "Margaret Briggs," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Dot pressed her hand flat against her knee. Margaret Briggs had been a patient at Memphis General 15 years ago. Chest surgery routine valve replacement that became complicated. Dot had worked her room for 6 consecutive nights during recovery, back when Dot was still running the cardiovascular floor. They had talked the way patients and nurses talked at 2 in the morning when the ward was quiet, the particular honesty that came from lying in a hospital bed in the dark and saying things you would never say in daylight. Margaret had been 73 years old and sharp as a tack, and prone to saying exactly what she thought about every subject that crossed her mind. She had spoken about her son who died young, and his wife who was not right in the head, and the grandson she was trying to raise and doing a decent job of. She had spoken about the grandchild that grandson might someday have, and how she hoped someone would be there to watch over that child if she was not around. Dot had given the woman her personal number the last night of her stay, had written it on the back of a hospital business card, and tucked it into Margaret's hand and said, "If you ever need anything." She had not expected Margaret Briggs to file that number as an emergency contact for a grandchild who did not yet exist. She had not expected a great many things, Mrs. Calloway Jessica Mercer said carefully. Deputy Hargrove is at the hospital right now. He has a court-issued guardianship document. He has been asking to take Lily home. Hospital security is holding him in the waiting area, but they cannot legally keep him there much longer. And Lily, her voice dropped when Hargrove walked past her room 2 hours ago. She did not scream. She just went completely silent and stared at the wall until a nurse moved her bed away from the window. Dot stood up. She picked up her truck keys from the nightstand. "Which floor is she on?" Dot said. "Pediatric, 4th floor, room 412. I am 2 hours out of Memphis. Do not let Hargrove anywhere near that room until I get there." "Mrs. Calloway, I am not sure I have the authority to." Dot said, "Then find someone who does. Tell the attending physician that an 8-year-old child presenting with cigarette burns and a fractured wrist needs a full trauma assessment before anyone has legal standing to move her. Any emergency room doctor worth their license knows that. Buy me 2 hours." A pause. "Then I will try." "Do not try. Do it." She hung up. She finished pulling on her boots. She took her coat from the hook by the door, the heavy canvas one with the fleece lining that Raymond had given her the Christmas before he got sick. She took her truck keys and her billfold, and her phone charger, because the drive to Memphis was 2 hours, and she had learned a long time ago that you did not go into uncertain situations with an uncertain battery. She paused at the door to the kitchen. On the wall beside the refrigerator was the photograph she had lived with for 6 years. Her son Marcus, in his dress uniform, 26 years old, grinning with the particular brightness of a young man who believed completely in what he was doing. Staff Sergeant Marcus Calloway, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. He had shipped out 11 days after that photograph was taken. He had not come back. Dot looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she turned off the kitchen light and walked out into the Tennessee night. The drive to Memphis on Interstate 40 at midnight was the particular kind of lonely that belonged to highways in the dark. Headlights ahead and headlights behind, and the flat black of the fields on either side, and the sky above carrying more stars than the city ever showed you. Dot drove with the radio off. She thought about Margaret Briggs, who had been dead for 18 months and had still found a way to reach across the distance and pull Dot into something she did not yet fully understand. She thought about an 8-year-old girl lying in a hospital bed on the 4th floor of Memphis General with 4 cigarette burns on her back and a fractured wrist, and a deputy waiting in the lobby to take her home. She pressed the accelerator down and drove. Memphis General rose out of the city at 2:15 in the morning, 11 floors of lit windows against the dark sky. Dot parked in the visitor structure and walked through the sliding doors and crossed the lobby floor, her boots loud on the polished tile. The night security guard at the front desk looked up. She showed him her expired nursing credentials because she had learned that an expired badge was more persuasive than no badge at all, and told him she was there to consult on a pediatric case in room 412. He waved her through. The 4th floor corridor smelled like antiseptic and floor wax, and the particular staleness of institutional air that she had breathed for 3 decades. She knew this smell the way other people knew the smell of their childhood kitchens. It settled into her chest like something returning home. A young woman with dark circles under her eyes and a CPS badge clipped to a rumpled blazer was standing outside room 412 with her arms crossed and her face tight. She looked up when she heard Dot's boots on the linoleum. "Mrs. Calloway." Dot said, "How is she?" "Sleeping. The doctor gave her something for the pain about an hour ago." Jessica Mercer exhaled. "She has been in and out. When she is awake, she does not talk, just watches the door." "Where is Hargrove?" "Waiting room on the 1st floor. The attending physician, Dr. Paulson, told him the full trauma assessment was not complete, and he could not release the patient until it was. Hargrove threatened to call his supervisor. Dr. Paulson told him to go right ahead. Good doctor. He is a good man." Jessica glanced down the hallway, but he can only hold Hargrove off until the assessment is complete, and it is almost complete. Maybe another 40 minutes. Dot pushed open the door to room 412. The room was dim lit by the glow of the monitoring equipment and the thin light coming through the partially open blinds. Lily Briggs lay in the hospital bed with her left arm in a temporary cast and her small body wrapped in a gown that was too large for her. Her hair was dark brown and matted on one side from lying down. Her face in sleep was the face all children had in sleep, open and undefended, the day's damages temporarily set aside. On her left shoulder, visible above the line of the gown, was the edge of a bruise, faded to yellow-green, old enough to be a week or more past. A cigarette burn below it, neat and round, the kind of mark left by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Dot stood at the foot of the bed for a long moment. She had seen a great many things in 30 years of emergency medicine. She had held the hands of people in the last minutes of their lives. She had watched residents who were skilled physicians fail at the simple human task of being present in a room with suffering. She had learned to manage what she felt so it did not compromise what she did. That discipline was 30 years deep in her bones. It did not entirely protect her from what she felt standing at the foot of this child's bed. She moved around to the chair beside the bed and sat down. She did not touch Lily. She just sat there in the dim room and waited the way she had learned to wait through long hospital nights, patient and present and alert. Lily's eyes opened at 2:31. She looked at the ceiling first, then turned her head and looked at Dot with the flat, assessing gaze of a child who had learned to measure the danger in every room before she did anything else. Dot said, "Hi, sweetheart. My name is Dorothy. You can call me Dot if you want." Lily looked at her without speaking. Her eyes moved to the door, then back to Dot. "He is not up here," Dot said. "The deputy, he is downstairs. There are people making sure he stays there for now." Lily looked at her for another long moment. Then she said, "Are you a doctor?" "I used to be a nurse. A long time ago." "Why are you here?" Dot considered the question carefully. She said, "Because your great-grandmother Margaret thought I might be useful someday, and I think she was right." Something shifted in Lily's face. Not softening exactly, more like a door opening a crack to let in a thin blade of light. "Grammy Margaret," she said. "She thought about you," Dot said. "Even after she was gone, she was still thinking about you. That is how much she loved you." Lily looked at her left arm in the cast. Then she looked back at Dot. She said, "My grandpa does not know I am here. They cannot find him." Dot said, "No. They have been calling him. Do you know where he might be?" Lily said he has his phone off when he rides. He always turns it off when he rides because he says a buzzing phone and a highway are a bad combination. Dot said he rides motorcycles. Lily said he is the president of Iron Cross. She said it the way a child said something they had heard many times, with the particular pride of second-hand ownership. He has a tattoo of the cross on his left hand. He says it means you do not leave your people behind. Dot felt something move in her chest. A recognition that arrived before she could examine it, the way certain smells arrive before you had time to name them. She said, "What is your grandpa's name?" Lily said Wade. "Wade Briggs." The room was very quiet. The monitoring equipment beeped its steady rhythm. Outside the window, the Memphis sky was starting to lighten, at its lowest edge a thin, gray line above the buildings. Wade Briggs, Iron Cross MC. She had heard that name once before, in another kind of darkness. Her son Marcus had mentioned Wade Briggs in his last letter home, the one that arrived 6 weeks after he shipped out on his final deployment. He had written about his squad, the men he trusted his life to, and he had said, "There is a Marine named Briggs who came up through the same program I did, runs with a club back in Tennessee when he is stateside. Hard man, but good. If something happens to me and you ever need anything, you could reach out to them. Iron Cross MC. They are solid people. They do not leave their people behind." She had folded that letter. She had put it in the box with the others and had not looked at it again after the flag was folded and handed to her, and the rifles fired their triple salute over her son's grave. She had not reached out to Wade Briggs or Iron Cross MC. She had not reached out to anyone. She said to Lily, "I need to make a phone call. I am going to step just outside the door. Is that okay?" Lily looked at the door. She said, "Do not go far." "Right outside," Dot said. "I will leave the door cracked so you can see me." She stepped into the hallway. Jessica Mercer was still there, back against the wall, running on coffee and duty. Dot said, "I need Wade Briggs's phone number." Jessica said, "He is the listed primary contact. We have been calling since midnight and he is not. I know why he is not answering. Give me the number anyway." Jessica scrolled her phone and read the number aloud. Dot dialed it. It rang 5 times. Then a voice came on that sounded like it had been formed by weather and distance and things that did not resolve easy. "Briggs," Dot said, "Mr. Briggs. My name is Dorothy Calloway. My son was Staff Sergeant Marcus Calloway, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. He served with you." A silence that lasted 2 seconds and felt much longer. Dot said, "Your granddaughter Lily is at Memphis General Hospital, 4th floor. She was admitted tonight with injuries consistent with child abuse. She is currently being held from a man named Cole Hargrove, who has a guardianship document and will have the legal right to take her in approximately 30 minutes. Another silence. When Wade Briggs spoke again, his voice had changed. It was still low and still composed, but underneath it something had shifted, the way ground shifted before a seismic event. He said, "How bad?" Dot said, "Cigarette burns, fractured wrist, bruising. She is conscious and she is talking. She asked about you." He said, "I am 4 hours out." Dot said, "You do not have 4 hours. Neither does she." She heard engine noise, wind, a pause in which she imagined a large man looking at a dark highway and doing math. He said, "How many minutes do you need?" Dot said, "Get here as fast as you can and bring whoever you trust." Then she went back into room 412 and sat down beside Lily Briggs and waited with the particular patience of a woman who had been waiting for one kind of call or another her whole adult life. What happened in the next 40 minutes moved in the compressed time of emergency medicine, each minute full to its edges. Dr. Paulson came to the room and spoke to Doc quietly in the hallway. He was a big man with tired eyes, in the manner of someone who had been in pediatric emergency medicine long enough to recognize the architecture of deliberate harm. He said he could hold Hargrove on procedural grounds for perhaps another half hour, but after that the guardianship document was clean on its face, and he had no legal basis to refuse release. Dot said, "I need 30 minutes. He said, "I will give you 25. And then he walked away with the brisk walk of a man who had decided to do the right thing and was moving before he could change his mind. Jessica Mercer pulled Dot aside and showed her the guardianship paperwork on her tablet. It was a Shelby County court document signed by a family court judge 6 months prior. It listed Cole Hargrove, deputy sheriff, as legal guardian of Lily Renee Briggs minor, following the deaths of both parents and the subsequent incapacitation and death of the minor's great-grandmother. It was, as far as Dot could read, a legitimate document. She said, "How does a deputy sheriff end up as the legal guardian of a biker's granddaughter?" Jessica said, "That is what I have been trying to figure out for the last 3 hours. Wade Briggs never filed for custody. There is a notation in the record that says he was contacted about guardianship and declined. But when I tried to verify that the notation does not have a caseworker's signature, it does not have a date. It is just a typed line that says guardian declined." Dot said, "That notation is fabricated." Jessica said, "I believe so, but I cannot prove it tonight." Dot looked down the hallway toward the elevators. She could hear, or imagine she could hear, the weight of the man waiting on the first floor, the particular patience of someone who expected to win because he had always won before. She went back into room 412. Lily was awake and sitting up slightly against the pillow. Her eyes tracked to Dot immediately. There was a quality to that watching that Dot recognized from long experience, the vigilance of a child who had learned that the adults in her life were not reliably safe, and so she monitored them the way prey monitored an open field. Dot sat in the chair beside the bed. She said, "Can I ask you something?" Lily said. "Okay," Dot said. "How long has Cole Hargrove been your guardian?" Lily said, "Since Grammy Margaret got sick." She said at first it was just until Grandpa got back from wherever he was. But then Grandpa came back and Grammy Margaret got worse, and then she died. And then a judge said it was supposed to stay with Mr. Cole. Dot said, "Did your grandpa know about the arrangement?" Lily said he came to the house once, last spring. He and Mr. Cole talked for a long time outside. Grandpa looked angry. Then he left and Mr. Cole was quiet for a whole week after. And when I asked what happened, he grabbed my arm. She said it plainly, the way children reported things that had been normalized by repetition. Dot kept her face still. She said, "Has he hurt you before?" "Before tonight." Lily looked at her left arm in the cast. She said, "It is usually not this bad." Dot said, "Have you ever told anyone?" Lily said, "Grammy Margaret. Before she got really sick, she said she was going to fix it. She said I was not to worry. And then she got so sick she could not talk anymore, and then she died." The room was quiet. Dot looked at this child 8 years old and matter of fact about her own suffering, the way children were when the suffering had become structural, woven into the daily fabric of their lives. She said, "Your grandpa is coming. I called him. He will be here as fast as he can." Lily said Grandpa does not know how to get here fast. He knows how to get here loud. Despite herself, Dot almost smiled. She said, "I think that will do." She heard them before she saw them. The sound traveled up through the building's structure, muffled by floors and walls, but unmistakable to anyone who had heard it before. The combined low thunder of multiple motorcycle engines arriving in a parking structure, echoing off concrete in a way that made the building itself feel it. Then boots in a stairwell, the fourth-floor door opening. Dot stepped out of room 412 and into the hallway. There were 11 of them first moving through the corridor with the quiet efficiency of men who were used to moving in formation through uncertain terrain. They wore leather cuts over denim and flannel iron cross patches on their backs, their boots making solid sounds on the linoleum. Their faces carried the particular damage of men who had done hard things and lived with the results. They did not speak. They took up positions along the wall with the natural economy of motion that came from doing this kind of thing before. Behind them came Wade Briggs. He was 58 years old and built like something that had been tested by forces most men never encountered and had come through the testing harder rather than broken. His hair was gray-white, worn short on the sides and longer on top. There was a scar along the left side of his face that ran from his cheekbone to his jaw, burned smooth and permanent, the kind of mark left by fire moving at speed. His eyes were the flat gray of early morning before the sun committed to rising, and they moved across the corridor with the methodical attention of someone assessing threat, the way other people check the weather. He was the kind of man that rooms noticed. He looked at Dot and stopped. She looked at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the corridor held its breath. Nurses pausing at medication carts. A young resident looking up from his chart. The ordinary nighttime machinery of a hospital, holding still in the presence of something it did not quite have a category for. Wade Briggs said, "You are Marcus's mother." Dot said, "I am." Something moved through his face. Not emotion exactly, more like the acknowledgement of a debt that had been accumulating for a long time and had now arrived at collection. He said, "I should have come to find you." After. Dot said, "We can talk about that later. Right now we have about 15 minutes before a man downstairs with a court document tries to take your granddaughter out of this hospital." Wade looked at the door to room 412. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he looked back at Dot and said, "Which floor is he on?" "Lobby," Wade said. "And there are how many of us up here?" Dot looked at the bikers lining the wall. She said 11, plus more coming. Wade said, "I made calls on the ride. Another 23 coming from Nashville and Knoxville, 40 minutes out." Dot said, "We do not have 40 minutes, Wade said. "Then 11 will do for now." He went to room 412 and opened the door and went inside. Dot followed. Lily was sitting up in the bed. She looked at the doorway. When she saw Wade, she went completely still for 1 second, and then something in her face changed, all at once a rapid dissolving of the held-together quality she had been maintaining since Dot arrived. And she said, "Grandpa," in a voice that carried a year's worth of waiting inside it. Wade crossed the room in 4 steps and sat on the edge of the bed and put his arms around his granddaughter with the careful deliberateness of someone who knew exactly where the injuries were and was making sure not to touch them. Lily pressed her face against his chest. Her shoulders shook once. Then she held still the way children held still when they were finally in the safest place they knew and were afraid to move in case it was not real. Dot stood near the door and watched this. She had seen a great many reunions in hospital rooms. This one carried a particular weight, the weight of time lost and harm that should not have happened, and the particular fierceness of love that had not been able to protect and was now here anyway. Wade said low and quiet, "I got you, little bird. I got you now." Lily said, "He broke my wrist, Grandpa." Dot saw Wade's jaw tighten. His arms were gentle, but his face was doing something different. The kind of controlled fury that only appeared in men who had learned to separate what they felt from what they did, because the stakes of losing that separation were too high. He said, "I know." She said, "He told me you did not want me." He said, "That is a lie. I have always wanted you. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." Dot stepped back out of the room and closed the door behind her. In the hallway, Jessica Mercer was on her phone, talking quickly and quietly. The bikers along the wall had not moved. A night nurse was speaking to one of them in a low voice, and the biker was nodding with the patient cooperation of someone who understood he was a large and alarming presence in a place where that was not standard and was trying to be useful rather than frightening. Dot's phone buzzed. "Unknown number, Memphis area code." She answered it. The voice was male, mid-30s, the practiced calm of someone who delivered difficult information professionally. He said, "Mrs. Calloway, my name is Nate Holden. I am a sergeant with Memphis PD. I have a situation in the lobby I need your help with." Dot said, "Deputy Hargrove." Sergeant Holden was quiet for a moment. He said, "You know about the situation. I have known about it for 2 hours." He said, "Cole Hargrove is a Shelby County deputy and he has a valid guardianship document. I have 11 motorcycle club members who arrived in the last 20 minutes and are refusing to leave the lobby, and my captain is about 4 minutes from calling this a hostile situation and sending up a tactical response." Dot said, "The child in room 412 has 4 cigarette burns on her back and a fractured wrist. Dr. Paulson has filed a mandatory abuse report. Under Tennessee statute, the filing of that report triggers an automatic 72-hour hold before any guardian can remove a minor from a medical facility pending investigation. Your captain knows that." A pause. He said the statute requires the investigating officer to authorize the hold. Dot said, "Who is the investigating officer assigned to the abuse report?" A longer pause. He said, "Cole Hargrove is the deputy on duty for Shelby County Family Matters tonight." Dot was quiet for 3 seconds. She said, "Sergeant Holden. The investigating officer and the named guardian are the same person. You understand what that means?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Call your captain and tell him that." She heard him exhale. He said, "Give me 10 minutes." She said, "You have 7. She hung up and turned to find Wade Briggs standing in the hallway. He had heard at least part of the conversation. His expression was unreadable in the way that faces were unreadable when the person wearing them had applied a great deal of practice to the task. He said, "You used to do emergency medicine." Dot said, 30 years, Memphis General, Nashville General, 2 rural hospitals in between." He said, "You know this building." She said, "I know most hospitals well enough." He said, "Hargrove is going to push back on Holden. His captain covers for him." Dot said, "How do you know that?" Wade looked at her with those gray morning eyes. He said, "Because the guardianship document that put Lily in his house is the most crooked piece of paper I have ever seen, and I spent 2 months trying to find a lawyer who would look at it before I ran out of money. Someone made sure that document was clean. That does not happen without someone covering it. Dot said, "Who is Cole Hargrove to the department? Who does he report to?" Wade said, "Captain Frank Decker, Organized Crime Unit." Dot looked at the wall of the corridor for a moment. Organized crime. A deputy with custody of a biker's granddaughter. A flash drive that might or might not exist somewhere. A great-grandmother who died before she could fix what she had said she was going to fix. She said, "We need to talk about what Hargrove actually wants." "I do not think it is Lily." Wade said no. He said it flat certain. He is not interested in Lily. She is leverage. "For what?" Wade looked down the corridor toward the elevators. He said, "My son Kevin died 11 months ago. The official cause was a traffic accident on Interstate 40. He was 32 years old, and he had been riding that road his whole life, and he did not make mistakes on it." Dot said, "What was he doing before he died?" Wade said he worked in the city tax assessor's office for 3 years. "He told me 6 months before the accident that he had found something in the city's asset records that he needed to be careful with. He was going to take it to the right people. I told him to be careful. A month later, he was dead." Dot said, "And you think Hargrove killed him?" Wade said, "I think someone did." Below them in the lobby, a door opened. Voices rose. Dot and Wade looked at each other. The elevator at the end of the corridor chimed, and the doors opened, and Cole Hargrove stepped out onto the 4th floor. He was 39 years old, clean-shaved in civilian clothes, a blue jacket over a collared shirt, the deliberate presentability of someone who wanted to appear reasonable rather than official. He was average height and average build, and had the particular quality of men who were dangerous, not because of their physical presence, but because of their certainty in their own protection. He moved down the corridor with the assurance of a man who had never been stopped before. He stopped when he saw the bikers along the wall. He stopped and he looked at them, all 11 of them in their cuts and boots, and something passed through his face that he controlled quickly. It passed so fast you might miss it if you were not looking. But Dot had been watching people's faces in crisis for 30 years. What she saw in Cole Hargrove's face in the moment before he controlled it was not surprise. It was recognition. He knew about Wade Briggs. He knew about Iron Cross. And he had come up here anyway, which meant he believed the document in his hand was sufficient to override everything else, including 30 bikers and a 74-year-old woman blocking his path. He looked at Dot. He said, "You are not staff here." Dot said, "No." He said, "You have no legal standing in this matter." She said, "I have a standing invitation from Margaret Briggs, who is not here to voice it herself, and the common decency that apparently stopped appearing on the hospital roster the same time you did." His eyes moved to Wade. He said, "Briggs." Wade said nothing. Hargrove said, "You understand the guardianship document is a court order. You interfering with my custody of that child is a felony. I can have every man in this hallway arrested." Wade said, "Then do it." The silence was particular. It was the silence of a man who had said a thing to provoke fear and found the fear absent. Dot said, "Deputy Hargrove, under Tennessee Statute 36-1-113, the filing of a mandatory abuse report initiates an automatic 72-hour protective hold. Dr. Paulson filed that report at 12:45 this morning. You cannot remove Lily Briggs from this facility for 72 hours, regardless of what your guardianship document says." Hargrove looked at her. He said, "The investigating officer can waive that hold." Dot said, "The conflict of interest provisions of that same statute prohibit a named guardian from serving as the investigating officer on an abuse report filed on a child in their custody. You are both the guardian and the assigned investigating officer. You cannot waive your own hold." Hargrove's jaw moved. He said, "That is not how this works." Dot said, "That is exactly how it works. I have watched it work that way in 3 different hospitals, and I suspect Sergeant Holden, who is downstairs right now explaining this to your captain, would agree with me." Hargrove looked at the bikers. He looked at Dot. He looked at the closed door of room 412. Something moved through his face that she could not entirely read. something more complex than anger, something that mixed calculation with the beginning of desperation. He said, "This is not over." Dot said, "No, it is not, but it is over for tonight." Hargrove looked at Wade one more time. Then he turned and walked back toward the elevators. His footsteps were measured and controlled. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in. The doors closed. The corridor let out a collective breath. Jessica Mercer appeared at Dot's elbow. She said, "How did you know about the conflict of interest provision?" Dot said, "I have been reading CPS statutes in the car for the last 2 hours. I did not know about the specific provision until 40 minutes ago, but the principle is solid. And Hargrove did not know whether I was bluffing or not." "Were you bluffing?" Dot said, "Look up Tennessee 36-1-113 tonight and tell me tomorrow." Behind her, the door to room 412 opened. Wade Briggs stood in the doorway. He looked at the empty corridor where Hargrove had been. Then he looked at Dot. He said, "You bought us a night," Dot said. "At most. He will be back with a judge's direct order before this is over." Wade said, "Then we need to figure out what he actually wants before he comes back with enough authority to take it." He stepped back into the room. Dot followed. Lily was awake, sitting up with her grandfather's cut jacket laid across her shoulders like a blanket, too large for her, but hers completely. She looked at Dot with those careful eyes and said, "Is he gone?" "For now," Dot said. Lily looked at the window. She said, "He is going to come back. He always comes back." Dot sat in the chair beside the bed. She said, "Some things that always come back eventually stop coming back. That is what we are working on." Lily looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached under the pillow and drew out something small. She held it out toward Dot. It was a flash drive, small and orange and unremarkable, the kind of thing that sat in junk drawers and got lost in couch cushions. Lily held it in her palm with the gravity of a child who understood it was important without knowing why. She said, "Daddy gave me this before he got sick. He sewed it into the hem of my nightgown, and he said, 'Keep it hidden and do not give it to Mr. Cole no matter what he asks.' He said someday someone trustworthy would come and I should give it to them." Lily looked at Dot. She said, "Grammy Margaret told me once about a nurse who was kind to her. She said if I ever met someone who reminded me of that kind of person, I should trust them." The room was quiet except for the monitoring equipment. Dot looked at the flash drive in the child's hand. She looked at Wade, who was watching his granddaughter, with an expression that carried grief and pride in approximately equal measure. She said to Lily, "Can I hold on to this for you?" Lily said, "That is why I showed you." Dot took the flash drive and closed her hand around it. Outside the window, Memphis was beginning to separate itself from the dark, the first gray seam of dawn coming up between the buildings. Wade said quietly, "Kevin told me there was evidence. He told me it was important enough that people might kill for it. I did not know he had already made a copy." Dot said he made sure his daughter had it. He made sure she knew to keep it hidden. Wade said he trusted the right people with it, even when he could not be there himself. Dot looked at the flash drive in her hand. She thought about Kevin Briggs, 32 years old, driving a road he had driven his whole life and not making it home. She thought about her son Marcus, 26 years old, and grinning in his dress uniform, certain of what he was doing. She thought about the particular ways in which people tried to protect the things they loved, and how sometimes those efforts arrived only after those people were gone, passed through the hands of others, arriving in unexpected rooms at unexpected hours. She closed her hand tighter around the drive. She said, "We need somewhere safe to go before dawn. Hargrove will have a judge's order by morning, and this hospital will not be able to hold him off a second time." Wade said, "I know a place." Dot said, "How far?" Wade said, "Far enough." She looked at Lily. The girl was watching her with those careful eyes, and underneath the wariness there was something else, the particular quality of a child who had been waiting a long time for something to change and was not entirely sure yet whether this was that change or whether it would dissolve like the others. Dot said, "How do you feel about motorcycle rides?" Lily looked at her grandfather. She said, "Grandpa never lets me ride." Wade said, different circumstances. Lily thought about this. Then she said, will you stay next to me the whole time? Dot said, every mile. Lily looked at the window where the dawn was starting to show. She said, okay. And in that hospital room in Memphis, Tennessee, at 5 minutes past 4 in the morning, with a flash drive in her hand and a child's conditional trust and 34 bikers holding the hallway and something that might have been the beginning of justice, waiting on a small orange drive, Dorothy Calloway made a decision that had been gathering toward her for a long time without her knowing it. She stood up. She squared her shoulders. She said, then let us get moving before the light comes up. Wade Briggs looked at her. In his gray morning eyes, she saw something she had not expected to find. Not just gratitude, not just the acknowledgement of a debt, something more like recognition. The kind that came from realizing that the person standing across from you had been shaped by forces that ran parallel to your own losses, traveling the same geography, even when the travelers never met. He said, Marcus talked about you. In the field, he said his mother was the toughest woman he ever knew. Dot said, he told me about you too. He said you were solid people. Wade said, we try to be. He moved to the door and opened it. The hallway beyond was full of leather and iron and the quiet readiness of men who had showed up because they were asked to and were not interested in leaving until the job was done. Dot picked up her coat from the chair. She put the flash drive in her inside pocket close to her chest. She took one last look at the room, at the monitoring equipment and the hospital bed, and the ordinary medical machinery of crisis and survival. Then she walked out into the hallway to begin whatever came next. The machine shop sat at the end of a private gravel road that wound through 40 acres of scrub pine and second-growth hardwood. Earl Dixon had built it 20 years ago for machining work, and it had the look of a building that had never been intended to be attractive, only functional. Cinder block walls, corrugated steel roof, a loading bay on the south side big enough to drive a truck into, 2 industrial fluorescent fixtures hanging from the ceiling that buzzed when they warmed up and cast a light that was more honest than flattering. By the time the convoy arrived at 5:15 in the morning, someone had already unlocked the bay doors and run a propane heater in the corner until the interior was less than freezing. There were folding chairs, a card table, 2 sleeping bags unrolled near the heater for Lily, and a cooler with water and sandwiches. Lily fell asleep on the sleeping bag 17 minutes after arriving, her cast arm tucked against her chest, her grandfather's cut jacket spread over her shoulders. The medication the hospital had given her for pain was still working, and sleep took her the way sleep took children who had been through too much, suddenly and completely, like a light being switched off. The bikers took up positions without being told. 2 near the road entrance, 2 at the building's back. The rest inside or close their engines, cool their presence, making the building feel less like a hiding place and more like a fortress. Dot sat at the card table with a flash drive and a laptop that Wade produced from a locked saddlebag. He sat across from her. 2 older riders sat along the wall close enough to see the screen. The drive opened. There were 4 files, 3 labeled with dates and letter codes. The 4th was labeled Read First and was a text document. She opened it. The writing was direct and without sentiment, the writing of someone who had decided that clarity mattered more than comfort. It said, if you are reading this, I did not make it. My name is Kevin Briggs. I work for the City of Memphis Tax Assessor's Office for 3 years. What I found there is documented in the other 3 files. Here is the short version. Captain Frank Decker of Memphis PD Organized Crime Unit has been running a theft operation out of his unit for at least 6 years. Asset seizures from criminal prosecutions are being underreported. The gap between what is seized and what is reported goes into a fund that Decker controls. Over 6 years, my best estimate, based on the records I could access, is approximately $4.2 million. Cole Hargrove is Decker's primary operation manager. He handles logistics documentation and enforcement. Enforcement meaning what you think it means. 3 people that I know of tried to report what they found. A city accountant named Ruth Weaver, a junior detective named Paul Slater, a police officer named Marcus Calloway, who left the force and entered the Marines and died in Iraq. I do not know whether Marcus Calloway's death was connected. I do not know enough to say. But I know he filed a formal complaint against Decker's unit 8 months before he enlisted, and I know that complaint was removed from the records. I found the original in a paper archive that had not been digitized. I have photographed it. It is in File 3. I am giving this to my daughter because I do not know who else to trust, and because she is the safest place I know. She will not understand it, but she will keep it hidden if I tell her to. She is good at doing what I ask. If you are reading this because something happened to her, I am sorry. I thought hiding it with her was safer than keeping it myself. I may have been wrong about that. Find someone in the FBI, not Memphis Field Office, Nashville. There is an agent named Marcus Webb who handled a corruption case out of Davidson County 2 years ago. He is clean. Use him. Kevin Briggs. The document ended. The machine shop was very quiet. The propane heater hissed in the corner. Lily slept without moving. Dot sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at what she had just read. Wade said Marcus Calloway filed a complaint against Decker. She said, yes. He said, before he enlisted. She said, 8 months before. Kevin says the complaint was removed from the records. Wade looked at the wall. He said Marcus enlisted after the complaint went nowhere. Dot said, that is one way to read it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. She had not known this. She had known her son worked as a Memphis City police officer for 4 years before enlisting. She had known he was not happy in the work, had not said why exactly, had said there were things he did not agree with and people he did not trust, and that the military offered a cleaner version of what he wanted to do with his life. She had not asked too many questions because Marcus was 22, and she had believed he was finding his way. She had not known he had tried to do the right thing and been shut down. She had not known that the man who shut him down was still operating 6 years later with $4 million in stolen funds and a deputy who hurt children as a method of keeping things quiet. She opened File 3. The photograph of the original complaint was slightly blurry, taken with a phone camera in a paper archive, but legible. Officer Marcus D. Calloway, badge number, date, subject, formal complaint regarding anomalous asset reporting in organized crime seizures. Captain F. Decker supervising. The body of the complaint was written in precise, careful language, the language of a young man who had understood that the credibility of what he was saying depended on the exactness of how he said it. 3 specific incidents documented: names, dates, dollar amounts. The methodical work of a person who wanted to be believed. Received stamp, date, and then nothing. No response, no investigation record, no referral. Just the original complaint sitting in a paper archive that had not been digitized, which meant someone had understood that paper could be buried. In the margin of the photograph complaint in tight block print were 4 words written in a different hand. Filed. No further action. Dot closed the file. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. She said he was 23 years old when he filed this. Wade said he was trying to do it the right way. She said the right way did not work. Wade said, no, it did not. She thought about Marcus in his uniform in the photograph on her kitchen wall, grinning with the brightness of conviction. She thought about him at 23 sitting at a desk, writing a formal complaint in careful language. She thought about what it must have felt like when that complaint disappeared and nothing happened, and the people he had complained about kept coming to work and kept running their operation. She thought about him deciding to leave. She set her hand flat on the table and kept it there. She said, I want to know everything Decker has done since my son filed that complaint. I want to know every person he has hurt and every dollar he has stolen and every piece of paper that someone moved so that what my son tried to report stayed buried. Wade said, that is what the other 2 files are. She said, then let us read them. They spent 2 hours going through the documentation. What Kevin Briggs had assembled was careful and extensive. Spreadsheets showing seizure amounts against reported amounts over 6 years, the gap consistent and growing. Photographs of documents, a timeline, specific transactions, names of front companies used to move money, the identities of at least 4 other officers who participated or who had received payments for silence. And at the end of File 2, a subfolder containing 2 audio recordings. The first was a conversation between Hargrove and a man whose voice Kevin's notes identified as Decker, recorded on a phone in Kevin's jacket pocket during a forced meeting about Kevin's employment records. In it, Decker's voice was calm and conversational, and said things that were not calm in any meaningful sense. It said that Kevin's access to city records was being revoked. It said that Kevin would find his employment situation difficult to continue. It said that people who looked at things they should not look at sometimes found their situations becoming difficult in other ways too. It said all of this in the voice of a man who was used to saying it and watching the person across from him understand without it ever being said clearly enough to be actionable. Kevin's notes below the audio file said, this was 8 weeks before the accident on Interstate 40. The second recording was shorter. It was Kevin's own voice addressing whoever found the drive. He spoke for 4 minutes. He described his employment. He described what he found. He described the meeting with Decker. And then at the end, he said something that stopped Dot completely. He said, there is one other thing I want whoever finds this to know. I was born at Memphis General Hospital in 1989. The nurse who delivered me was named Dorothy Calloway. My grandmother Margaret remembered her because she was there for the birth, and she said, Dorothy Calloway was the kindest person in that room. She said if I ever needed someone trustworthy, I should try to find her. I do not know if she will still be a nurse. I do not know if she will remember my grandmother, but I trust my grandmother's judgment, and I trust the kind of person who stays kind in a room where people are suffering. If you are Dorothy Calloway and you are listening to this, thank you for being there the night I was born, and I am sorry for what I am asking you to carry. The recording ended. Dot sat at the card table in the machine shop with her hands in her lap and did not move for a long moment. She remembered the birth, not the name specifically, not after 35 years and thousands of deliveries, but she remembered Margaret Briggs in the delivery room, 70 years old and fierce and steady, holding her grandson's hand through what had been a difficult labor, and a baby boy who had arrived into the world with a particular quality of alertness, looking around as though assessing his situation before committing to it. She had not known his name. She had not followed his life. She had given him the first minutes of his existence, and then moved on to the next room, the next patient, the next crisis, the way you did when the work was endless and the need always exceeded the capacity. And he had grown up knowing she existed, had put her name in a drive with everything he knew as the person to bring it to, had trusted his grandmother's memory of a nurse 35 years ago. Wade was looking at her. She said, I delivered Kevin in 1989. I did not know his name until now. Wade was quiet. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the sleeping bag in the corner where his granddaughter slept. He looked at Dot. Something moved through his face, the recognition of a pattern that had been assembling for a long time without anyone seeing the shape of it. He said, you were there the night he was born. She said, yes. He said, and Marcus filed the complaint that got buried. She said, yes. He said, Kevin found the evidence that Marcus tried to report. She said, and put it in the hands of a child who gave it to the woman who was there when he came into the world. The machine shop held the silence of a place where something had just been understood. One of the older bikers, a man named Garrett who had not spoken yet, said quietly, that is not coincidence. Dot said, no, it is not. She closed the laptop. She said, we need to contact FBI Nashville, the agent Kevin named Webb, today, before Decker knows we have the drive. Wade said Hargrove already knows the drive exists. Kevin told me before he died that Hargrove had been going through his house, looking for something. Kevin thought he had found it, but he had not. He had already moved it to Lily's dress. Dot said, so Hargrove knows Kevin had documentation. He just does not know what form it was in or where it went. Wade said he thought Kevin's copy was in a paper file somewhere. He has been looking for paper. Dot said, that gives us a window. Wade said, a small one. Decker is not slow. If we do not move today, Dot said, we move today. She stood. She said, I need to make a call. Then we need to figure out how to get this drive to Nashville. FBI without going through Memphis. She took her phone and walked to the far side of the shop where the light came through a gap in the roofing and stood there in a thin column of October sun. She dialed Jessica Mercer's number. Jessica answered on the second ring. She sounded like someone who had not slept. Dot said, I need the Nashville FBI number for an agent named Marcus Webb. I need it in the next 10 minutes. Jessica said Kevin mentioned Webb in his documents. Dot said, his recordings. A pause. Then there is more on that drive than I thought. Dot said, much more. We have documentation of a 6-year theft operation, 2 audio recordings, and evidence that a formal police complaint was removed from the record. We have enough to put Decker away if we can get it to the right person. Jessica said I can get Webb's direct line. I worked a case that touched his office 2 years ago. Give me 5 minutes. She hung up. Dot stood in the column of sunlight. She could hear Lily moving behind her, the small sounds of a child waking up, confused for a moment about where she was. Then Wade's voice, low and reassuring. Then Lily's silence that meant she had remembered where she was and that it was safe. She heard the sound of engines on the gravel road. Not motorcycles, cars, multiple. She turned. The bikers near the bay entrance were already moving. 2 of them had positioned themselves at the edge of the bay door, looking out. The atmosphere in the building changed the way it changed when people who were used to threat had detected it, not panic, just a rapid coalescence of attention. Wade appeared at her side. He said, 3 vehicles, Memphis plates, not police. Dot said, how do you know? He said, police come with more, and they come louder. She said, Hargrove's people. He said, likely. She looked at Lily, who was sitting up on the sleeping bag with her cast arm against her chest, watching the bay entrance with those flat, careful eyes. She had heard the engines. She knew what they might mean, but she was not running. She was watching. The same watchfulness she had brought to every room she had been in since she was put in Hargrove's house. The watchfulness of a child who had learned that the only reliable protection was information. Dot walked to the card table and picked up the laptop and the flash drive and put both in her coat pockets. She said to Wade, if they come through that door, what do we have? Wade said, 18 men inside. They have 3 cars and maybe 6 or 8 people. The building has 1 entry point on the front and a personnel door on the back east wall. If they know about the east door, they could split. If they do not, they come through the front. Dot said, do they have weapons? Wade said, assume yes. Dot said, then we do not let this become a firefight. She looked at the bay entrance. She said, is there a way to talk to them before it escalates? Wade looked at her. He said, you want to talk to Decker's crew. She said, I want to establish that this situation has already moved past the point where violence helps them. If they know the drive exists and that we have it hurting us, does not make the drive disappear. It just makes the people who hurt us into subjects of a federal investigation. Wade said, they may not be thinking that clearly. Dot said, then I will think it for them. Her phone buzzed. Jessica's text Webb's direct line. He is in. Tell him, Kevin Briggs. He will know. Dot called the number. It rang twice. A voice came on that was alert in the way voices were alert at 6 in the morning when someone had been doing this long enough to never fully stop. Webb. She said, Agent Webb. My name is Dorothy Calloway. Kevin Briggs said to use your name. I have his flash drive. I am in a machine shop 40 miles north of Memphis with 34 motorcycle club members and 8 armed men outside who work for Captain Frank Decker. I need federal presence at this location within the hour. She read the address from the sign on the wall. A 3-second pause. He said Kevin Briggs died 11 months ago. She said he left documentation that his daughter has been carrying since. I have the drive. I have read the files. I have heard the recordings. You are named in Kevin's note as clean. He said, what kind of documentation? She said, 6 years of asset seizure records, 2 audio recordings including Decker's voice, a formal complaint filed by a police officer that was removed from the record. Enough. He said, where is the child? She said, safe. Here with me. He said, do not engage. Stay inside. I am calling Nashville right now and dispatching Memphis Field separately. Memphis Field office is not involved in this response. Is that understood? She said, it is. He said, stay on the line. She put the phone against her coat and looked at Wade. She said, FBI Nashville is dispatching. 40 minutes at best. Wade said, the men outside are not going to wait 40 minutes. She said, no, they are not. She raised her voice so it would carry through the cracked bay door. She said, my name is Dorothy Calloway. I am 74 years old, and I am a retired nurse from Nashville. I have been on the phone with FBI Nashville agent Marcus Webb for the last 4 minutes. I have provided this location and a description of the current situation. Federal agents are in transit. Anyone who engages with this building in the next 40 minutes will be on federal surveillance footage from 3 different devices being transmitted to a secure server in Nashville. I am asking everyone outside to stay exactly where they are. She stopped speaking. The morning outside the bay door was quiet. Then a voice came back, male, measured with the quality of someone who had been instructed in advance to be reasonable. It said, Mrs. Calloway, we are not here to create a situation. We are here to ensure the safety of a minor child and to retrieve property that belongs to a Shelby County investigation. Dot said, the minor child is under medical supervision and has been entrusted to my care pending federal review of her guardianship status. The property you are referring to is evidence in a federal corruption investigation. Retrieving it would constitute obstruction of justice. I am letting you know this so that the decision you make in the next 40 minutes is made with full information. Silence again. Wade said, low. You are very good at this. Dot said, I learned it from 30 years of telling families things they did not want to hear. The skill is the same. You give people the truth clearly enough that denial becomes harder than acceptance. She picked up her phone. Webb was still on the line. She said, still here. He said, 22 minutes, 2 units en route. Local Tennessee Highway Patrol is also being notified under federal jurisdiction provision. She said, we are not going anywhere. She lowered the phone. Behind her, Lily had gotten up from the sleeping bag and walked to stand beside her grandfather. She was holding his hand with her right hand, her cast arm against her chest, her face toward the bay entrance with that watching quality she carried like a piece of clothing. She said, is Grandpa's club going to get in trouble? Dot said, no one here has done anything except protect you. Lily said, they always say that is not how it works. Dot said, sometimes they are right. Sometimes the people who say that are trying to make sure it keeps working that way. She looked down at the girl. But right now there are people coming who are on the right side of this. We just have to stay put until they get here. Lily looked at the bay entrance. She said, he is afraid of Grandpa, but he is not afraid of me. Mr. Cole. He does not think I know anything important. Dot said he was wrong about that. Lily said, I know. She said it without satisfaction, just plainly. The way she said most things. She said, Daddy said the most important thing about having information was knowing when to give it to the right person. She looked at Dot. She said, I think Daddy knew you were the right person even before I met you. The morning outside was holding. No movement from the perimeter. The men out there were waiting, calculating, doing the same math Dot was doing from the other side of the bay wall. She put her hand on Lily's shoulder gently, the way you touch someone who had been hurt enough that touch itself had become a thing to be careful with. She said, your daddy was smart. Lily said he was scared too. At the end. But he did it anyway. Dot said, that is what courage is. They stood together in the machine shop while the propane heater hissed and the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the federal agents drove north through the Tennessee morning, and outside 8 men held a perimeter around a building that contained a flash drive and a child and a 74-year-old woman who had learned over a long life that some fights you did not choose, but you did not walk away from either. 31 minutes later, the federal vehicles arrived. They came in two black SUVs with federal plates in the yellow windbreaker of the FBI Nashville field office. 4 agents and a driver, no lights or sirens, moving at the speed of people who wanted to arrive rather than announce themselves. Behind them, 2 Tennessee Highway Patrol units parked at the road entrance. The men outside the machine shop did not fight. 3 of them walked to the Highway Patrol units and placed their hands on the hood without being asked, which told Dot something about the level of instruction they had been given. 2 more were detained at the east door. Agent Webb was 55 years old, graying with the lean face of someone who ran in the mornings and kept his desk orderly. He came through the bay entrance and shook Dot's hand and looked at the flash drive she produced from her coat pocket with an expression that carried the quality of a man seeing the thing he had been told existed and finding it exactly where he expected. He said, "This is Kevin Briggs's documentation." She said, "Everything he compiled. 3 files and 2 audio recordings, including a conversation with Decker's voice on it." Webb said, "I know Kevin Briggs's name. We were 2 months from being able to bring him in safely when he died on Interstate 40. We never found what he was working with. He looked at the drive. He hid it well." Wade said he hid it in his daughter's dress. Webb looked at Lily, standing beside her grandfather, with her cast arm against her chest. He said to her, "Are you okay?" She said, "My wrist hurts." He said, "We are going to get you looked at." His voice carried the particular care that people use when they were talking to a child and were uncertain whether their ordinary manner was the right one for the circumstance. He said, "You have been very brave." Lily looked at him with those flat, careful eyes. She said, "I do not feel brave. I feel tired." Webb said, "That is what brave feels like afterward." His agent, Torres, documented the drive, photographed it in its original state, copied it to an encrypted device, then sealed the original in an evidence bag with the methodical care of someone who understood it would have a long, legal life. Dot stood with Wade near the bay entrance where the morning had finally become fully morning. The sun up and honest above the tree line, the October air cold and clean. 2 of the detained men were in the back of a patrol unit. She said to Webb when Torres had finished, "What happens now?" He said, "We go to Memphis. The documentation is sufficient for immediate warrants. Decker is going to find out what happened here, and he is going to run or do something desperate. We want to be ahead of both." She said, "And Lily." He said, "That is a family court matter. The guardianship document that placed her with Hargrove is fraudulent based on what we can see in the documentation. A judge will need to void it officially. That takes a hearing." She said, "How long?" He said, "With federal weight behind it, 2 days, maybe 1. She said, "And until then," he said, "she cannot go back to Hargrove's house, and she cannot go into standard foster placement in Shelby County because we do not know who else in the system is connected to Decker's operation." He paused. "Is there someone who can maintain custody informally until the hearing?" Dot looked at Wade. Wade looked at Dot. She said, "I have a house in Nashville." Webb said, "Any connection to Decker's operation?" She said, "I am a retired nurse. My connection to this is that Kevin Briggs put my name in his documentation as someone who could be trusted. That is the entirety of my connection." Webb looked at her for a moment. He said, "You are 74 years old." She said, "That is not a disqualifying characteristic." He almost smiled. He said, "I will authorize you as temporary custodian pending the hearing. It requires you to sign documentation that you are responsible for her physical safety and that you do not remove her from Tennessee." She said, "I can do that." He looked at Wade. He said, "And you?" Wade said, "I go where Lily goes." Webb looked at him for a long moment. He said, "Stay available for contact. Do not leave the state." Wade said, "We will be available." Garrett, the older biker who had not spoken until the question of coincidence, stopped beside Dot before he mounted his bike. He said, "Mrs. Calloway, your boy would have been proud of you." She said, "He would have told me I was being reckless." Garrett said, That is how you know he would be proud. He rode out. Dot stood in the bay entrance with the morning around her. She thought about Frank Decker somewhere in Memphis, making phone calls, learning what had happened. She thought about Cole Hargrove, who by now would know the drive had been found. She thought about two young men who had tried to do the right thing and had not lived to see it arrive at this particular morning. She thought about a woman named Margaret Briggs, who had written a retired nurse's phone number into a child's emergency contact file because she believed some people were worth trusting. Wade came to stand beside her. He said, "You know, this is not over yet." She said, "I know. Decker is not arrested." He said, "He is going to move fast when he finds out. He is going to try to get ahead of it." She said, "Then we stay close to Lily until Decker is in custody. We do not give him a target he can reach." He looked at her. He said, "You are willing to do that. Keep yourself in the middle of this until it is done." She said, "I was in the middle of it the moment Margaret Briggs wrote my name in that file. I just did not know it yet." He said, "Most people would have put the flash drive on Webb's desk and gone home." She said, "Lily does not know Webb. She does not have any reason to trust that going home means being safe. She needs someone who is not going to disappear when it gets complicated." Wade said, "And you are that person." She looked at him. She said, "For now, yes." He was quiet. Then he said, "You know what Marcus told me once? In the field. He said his mother had a way of walking into the worst thing in the room and making it feel like the thing had encountered her rather than the other way around." She said he made that sound more dignified than it is. "Mostly it is just that I have stopped being surprised by how bad things can get. Once you stop being surprised, you can start being useful." Wade said, "He said you would say something like that." She said, "He knew me well." The drive back should have been straightforward. Webb authorized Dot as temporary custodian, signed the paperwork in the back of his SUV, and gave her a direct number to reach his office. He was heading to Memphis with enough documented cause to pursue warrants against Decker and Hargrove before the end of the business day. They were 12 miles from the machine shop when the black Escalade pulled out of a farm road and fell in behind them. Wade saw it. He said nothing for a half mile. Then he said quietly, "We have a tail." Dot looked in the side mirror. The Escalade was 200 yards back, running without particular urgency. She said Decker moved faster than Webb expected. Wade said he always does. He has been running this operation for 6 years because he moves before people are ready. She said, "Do we call Webb?" He said, "Already texted Spire. He was 3 miles behind us. He will come up on the Escalade from the rear." The Escalade maintained its distance for 2 more miles. Then on a stretch of 2-lane road with trees tight on both sides, it accelerated. Wade said, "Hold on." He pressed the accelerator and the truck responded with the authority of a vehicle that had been well maintained. The gap held for a moment, then the Escalade came on faster. The sound of motorcycles came from behind multiple Spire's group catching up. The Escalade, hearing it too, pulled alongside rather than ramming the driver's window going down, and the man in the passenger seat held up a phone, not a weapon, and the phone showed a face on its screen. She recognized the face. Frank Decker was 52 years old and had the handsome, bland quality she had not seen in person but had seen in the files on Kevin's drive. His voice came through the phone's speaker, distorted by road noise, but clear enough. He said, "Mrs. Calloway, let us talk." Wade said, "Do not engage." Decker said, "The drive you have is inadmissible. It was obtained through illegal means. A chain of custody that goes through a flash drive sewn into a child's dress does not hold up in federal court. I have lawyers who have been preparing for exactly this scenario." Dot said loudly enough to carry through the window. "The audio recordings have your voice on them. Chain of custody requirements for audio evidence are different from documentary evidence. You know that." A pause. She saw something move through Decker's face on the phone screen, the particular recalculation of a man who had expected a less specific answer. He said, "There are ways for this to go that do not ruin everyone involved. A reasonable accommodation could be reached." She said, "You are offering me a bribe." He said, "I am offering a path that does not require federal prosecution of a decorated law enforcement officer for what amounts to administrative mismanagement. She said, "Your officer fractured a child's wrist and burned her with cigarettes. That is not administrative mismanagement." His face on the phone changed. The reasonable mask slipped. He said, "The child's situation is a separate matter from." She said, "There are no separate matters. There is what your operation did and what it cost." A police officer named Marcus Calloway tried to report it 8 years ago and was shut down. He died in Iraq 2 years after filing that complaint. Kevin Briggs found the original complaint in your archive paper files, and it is on this drive. You knew about Marcus Calloway's complaint. You made sure it stayed buried. The road noise filled the space between them. He said, "You cannot prove I knew about a complaint that was." She said, "Kevin's documentation includes a notation in your own handwriting in the margin of the complaint. You annotated it. You marked it to be filed instead of investigated. Your handwriting is on a document that confirms you personally suppressed a formal police complaint about your own operation." She had seen this in file 3 in the margin of the photograph complaint. A single line in type block print, the kind of mark a person made automatically managerially without thinking about what it would look like to someone who found it later. Filed. No further action. Decker said nothing for 2 seconds. The Escalade slowed. The truck pulled ahead. In the mirror, Dot watched the Escalade fall back as Spire's group swept up around it and past it like a current splitting around a rock. Her phone rang. "Webb," she answered. He said, "I am hearing there is a vehicle contact on Route 70. Are you safe?" She said, "We are past it." Decker attempted to negotiate. He said, "We are executing a warrant at his residence right now. He is not there." She said he was on a phone in a vehicle on Route 70 about 4 minutes ago. "He is mobile." Webb said, "We will find him. Get to Nashville. I will have agents meet you at your address." She said, "Understood." She lowered the phone. Wade said, "You knew about the handwriting annotation." She said, "I read everything on that drive in the machine shop. I retained what was specific." He said, "You dropped it on him in the middle of a moving vehicle to see what he would do." She said, "I needed to know how well prepared his legal team actually is. If they had a solid counter-argument for the handwriting notation, he would have had it ready. He did not. He went quiet. That tells me his lawyers have not seen the full documentation." Wade said, "That is a tactical move." She said, "It is triage. You find out what the worst problem is and you address it first. The worst problem was that he thought he had leverage. He does not. Now he knows that too." They drove. The Tennessee highway unrolled ahead of them. The sun was up fully, and the fields on both sides were the particular gold of October in the middle states, flat and wide and honest. In the back seat, Lily said, "Is it over now?" Dot turned. The girl was watching the road ahead with the held quality of someone who had been told things were going to be okay before and had not found that to be reliable. Dot said, "The worst part is over. There are still things that have to happen. A hearing, legal proceedings, things that take time. But the man who hurt you is not going to be able to do that again. The drive your daddy kept is in federal custody now," Lily said. "And then, can I live with Grandpa?" Wade said, "That is the plan, little bird." Lily said, "And Dot." He glanced at Dot. Dot looked back at him. She said, "I will be close. That I can promise." Lily seemed to consider the adequacy of this. Then she looked back out the window at the passing fields and said, "Grammy Margaret said things worked out if you put the right people in the right places." She was quiet for a moment. I think she was right. Nashville received them without ceremony. 2 FBI Nashville agents were waiting at Dot's house when they arrived, a man and a woman in their 30s, with the careful, professional manner of people who had been briefed. They checked identification. They secured the property perimeter. They occupied the front and rear positions with quiet efficiency. Dot unlocked her front door and walked into her own house, and felt for the first time in 16 hours the particular weight of her age. The drive, the night, the standing and waiting and thinking at speed. She was 74 years old, and she had been running since 11:47 the previous evening, and her body was beginning to present the bill. She put her coat on the hook by the door. Same hook, same coat. 24 hours had not changed the geography of her house, and the small disconnection of that, the familiar and the irrevocably altered occupying the same space, landed in her chest with a particular fullness. Lily came in behind Wade and stopped in the entrance hall. She looked at the kitchen, the table with its two chairs, the photograph on the wall beside the refrigerator. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. She said, "Is that your son?" Dot said, "Yes, that is Marcus." Lily said, "He looks like someone who would do the right thing." Dot said, "He was." Lily said, "He looks like he is laughing." Dot said, "He was always either very serious or laughing. He did not have much use for the middle ground." Lily considered this. Then she said, "My daddy was like that too." Dot said, "I know." She put the kettle on. She called the family lawyer Wade had mentioned, a woman named Claire Holden, who answered on the third ring and listened for 4 minutes without interrupting, and then said she could be in Dot's kitchen within 2 hours, and they should not sign anything until she arrived. Dot said, "We have federal agents outside." Claire said, "Good, let them stay outside. I will come to you." One of the agents appeared at the back door to say they had information that Decker had been located at a property in Shelby County, and FBI Memphis was executing the warrant. That Hargrove had been picked up at his residence without incident. Dot absorbed this. She said, "How much time before we know if the warrants are going to hold?" The agent said, "Agent Webb said to tell you the audio recordings are solid. The handwriting annotation on the complaint document was verified by a forensic examiner in the field. He said to tell you that the chain of custody on the audio is different for recordings made by a confidential source in the course of their work." She said Kevin was classified as a confidential source. The agent said he was in contact with our office before he died. He had been classified as a confidential source for 8 months. His recordings fall under informant protections. She said, "Thank you." She turned back to the kettle. Wade was at the kitchen table, making quiet calls to the club, updating people, releasing them from their positions. She could hear his voice doing the work of an organization, the specific language of a man who ran something and ran it well. She thought about what it cost running something like that. The responsibility of being the person others arrange themselves around. She had understood that cost in her own way in the long years of shift work in emergency medicine, being the one the ward organized toward in a crisis. She had been good at it and had sometimes been lonely inside it. She poured tea and brought him a cup. He looked at it and then at her with an expression that contained more than the ordinary gratitude for a cup of tea. He said, "I do not remember the last time someone brought me tea." She said, "That is not surprising. You are not the kind of man who looks like he needs things brought to him." He said, "Marcus said that about you too, that you were the kind of person other people brought things to." She said, "He said that." He said it like it cost you something. Being that person. She sat down across from him. She said, "It does. You are always the one holding the shape of things. Other people lean on the shape. You do not get to." He said, "Yes." They sat with that for a moment. He said, "For what it is worth, you can lean on this, whatever this is, whatever it turns out to be." She looked at him. He said it simply, without performance, the way people said true things they had been thinking for a while and had decided to say out loud. She said, "I will keep that in mind." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had found the bathroom and washed her face and looked slightly more like a child who lived in a house than one who had spent the night in transit. She said, "Dot, can I look at your books?" Dot said, "Go ahead. The living room. Bottom shelf has ones you might like." Lily disappeared. They heard the sound of her moving through the house with the tentative, exploratory quality of a child in an unfamiliar space, touching things and setting them down, learning the geography. Wade said she is going to need therapy. Dot said she is going to get it. He said she is going to need stability, a fixed point, someone who does not go anywhere. She said, "Yes." He said, "You are 74 years old." She said, "You mentioned that." He said, I am not saying it to be discouraging. I am saying it because the court will. The judge at the hearing will want to know the plan. What happens to Lily's stability if something happens to you? You need to have an answer for that. She looked at him. She said, I have thought about it. He said, and? She said, the answer is that you are part of the plan. That Lily's stability is not contingent on one person. That she has a grandfather who is getting his life arranged in Nashville and who will be present and consistent. The plan is a network, not a single point. He was quiet for a moment. He said, you want to do this together. She said, I think it makes sense. Two guardians are more convincing than one, and they are more stable than one. The family lawyer can advise on the structure, but yes, that is what I think makes sense. He said, you would be comfortable with that. She said, I have been comfortable with a great many things that I did not choose in the beginning. You learn comfort when the alternative is worse. He almost smiled. He said, that is not exactly a ringing endorsement. She said, what I mean is, I have spent 24 hours watching how you operate and who you are. What you did for Lily and what you did for Marcus without knowing you were doing it. A man who shows up the way you showed up when I called is a man worth building something with. He said, she is going to need braid lessons. I cannot do braids. Dot said, I can do braids. He said, and someone to drive her to school who does not arrive on a Harley. She said, I have a truck. He said, and help with the nightmares. She has them. She has had them since she came to live with Kevin. They got worse after Kevin died. Dot said, there are people who are very good at that. We will find the right one. He said, she is going to want to meet the club. She already considers the club family. She said the club can visit on appropriate occasions. He almost smiled again. This time it went slightly further. He said, define appropriate. She said, not on school nights, not before 8 in the morning, not with more than 8 motorcycles in the driveway at one time because of the neighbors. He said, that is very specific. She said, I have been thinking about it. He looked at her across the kitchen table in a house that still had 2 chairs at its table, and a photograph on the wall, and the smell of tea, and the sound of a child going through bookshelves in the living room. He looked at her the way people looked at things they were trying to understand were real. He said, I owe you more than I can say. For Marcus, for what I did not do, and for what you did today. She said, you do not owe me. We were both in the same situation, and we both did what needed to be done. That is not debt. That is just what people do for each other when things are serious. He said, Marcus said you would say that too. She said, he seemed to have said a great deal about me. He said he talked about home when things were bad. That is what people do in the field. And home for him was you. The way you were always the one who held the shape of things. He said he used to lie awake in the dark and think about your kitchen and the smell of the kettle and the way you had an answer for everything, even when the answer was not a good one. The room was quiet. The kettle was cold now. The October light came through the kitchen window at its particular autumn angle. She said, I did not always have an answer. He said he did not know that. She said, no, I suppose he did not. She stood and took his cup and her own and went to the sink and stood there for a moment, looking out the window at the agents in the backyard, and beyond them, the ordinary geography of her neighborhood, the oak tree at the fence line, the neighbor's mailbox, the street that led to the school district she had mentioned, because she had already been thinking about school districts. She thought about Marcus, not the photograph version, the private version, the one who called on Sunday evenings from wherever he was and talked about food and funny things and asked about the neighbors and her health and never said directly that he was afraid because he was her son and had learned from her not to show the middle register. She thought about all the things she had held the shape of. She thought about this new shape, strange and unexpected, and not at all what she had been doing the day before. A child and a man she had just met, and a network of motorcycle club members, and a federal investigation, and a hearing that was 48 hours away. Strange. And not, she thought, unwelcome. She turned from the window. She said, the lawyer will be here in an hour. You should call your club lawyer and make sure whatever you sign is consistent with what I am signing. We want the documents to be coherent. He said, already texted her. She said, good. And someone needs to get Lily's wrist properly seen to. I want an orthopedic consult, not just the emergency room cast. He said, I know a practice. They have worked with club members. She said, not because they have worked with club members, because they are good at pediatric orthopedics. He said, they are both. She said, then make the appointment. Frank Decker was arrested at 11:42 that morning at a property outside Bartlett, Tennessee, where he had gone with the apparent intention of retrieving documents he had stored there. FBI Memphis found him in the process of burning papers in a barrel behind a storage building. The papers were mostly destroyed, but the act itself was documented and added to the obstruction charges. Webb called Dot at noon. He said Decker is in custody. Hargrove is in custody. We have 3 other members of the unit in holding pending charges. The warrants are solid. The audio recording has been authenticated. The handwriting annotation has been verified as Decker's, she said, and the formal complaint, Marcus Calloway's complaint. He said, it is in the record now, where it always should have been. He paused. There will be a process for acknowledging what happened to Officer Calloway's complaint. It is not simple. It takes time in these cases, but it will happen. He said, Mrs. Calloway, what you did was not legal in every respect. The chain of events that led to this evidence being in our hands involved a number of things that a prosecutor could make unpleasant for you. She said, I am aware. He said, given the outcome and the nature of the case, the United States Attorney's Office is not pursuing charges against you, Wade Briggs, or the members of Iron Cross MC for the events of last night and this morning. She said, thank you for telling me. He said, the guardianship hearing is day after tomorrow. Judge Annette Reardon, Davidson County Family Court. She has been briefed. I do not normally do this, but you should know she is a fair judge, and she was briefed by me personally this morning. She said, that is helpful. He said, one more thing. He stopped. Then Kevin Briggs was a good man. He was careful, and he was brave, and he was trying to protect the right things. I wish we had gotten to him sooner. I am sorry we did not. She said he protected them anyway. In the end, he said, yes, he did. Goodbye, Mrs. Calloway. She put the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment in the quiet of the house. Through the living room doorway, she could see Lily on the sofa with a book, her cast arm in her lap, her feet not quite reaching the floor, reading with the focused absorption of a child who had found a safe space and was using it fully. Wade was on the porch making calls. Claire Holden's documents were spread on the kitchen table, organized and tabbed. Dot looked at the photograph on the wall. She said quietly to the photograph, they got him, Marcus. They got him. The photograph did not answer. But the October light through the window was warm on her face, and the house held around her the particular quality of a space that was becoming something different than it had been, something with more life in it, more noise, more need, more all of it. She had been living in a house with 2 chairs at the table for a long time. She thought she might need a 3rd chair. She went to the living room doorway. Lily looked up from the book. Dot said, the man who hurt you has been arrested. And the man who made it possible for him to hurt you is also arrested. They are not going to be able to come after you anymore. Lily held this information for a moment. Then she said, for how long? Dot said, a very long time, perhaps the rest of their lives. There will be trials and courts and it will take time, but they are not free, and they are not going to be free. Lily looked at the book in her lap. She said, Daddy said evidence was the most important thing, that it had to be in the right hands. She said, your daddy was right, and you kept it safe until it could be. Lily said, it was just in my dress. Dot said, you kept it safe for almost a year. Even when Hargrove was in your house and looking for it, you kept it safe. Lily said, I did not know what it was. I just did what Daddy said. Dot said, that is what trust is. Lily looked at the book. Then she said, Dot, can I call you something besides Dot? Dot said, what did you have in mind? Lily said, I do not know. She said it carefully, feeling for the shape of something. The way you said Grammy Margaret, it sounds like something. Like it had a place. She looked at Dot. Could I call you something like that? Dot was quiet for a moment. She thought about the various names she had been called over 74 years. Mrs. Calloway, nurse, mom, the specific weight of each of them. She said Graham would be all right, if you want. Lily looked at her. She said it quietly, trying it. Graham, Dot said. That works. Lily said it again, a little more settled. Graham. The Guardian hearing was held on a Thursday morning in a courtroom in Davidson County that smelled like old wood and legal documents and the particular institutional purpose of rooms that had witnessed a great many human decisions and would witness many more. Judge Annette Reardon was 61 years old, gray-haired with the specific authority of a judge who had done family law for 2 decades and had learned to read cases the way experienced nurses read patients, quickly and accurately, and without the sentimentality that prevented clear judgment. She had read the file. She had spoken with Agent Webb. She had reviewed the documentation provided by Claire Holden. She looked at Dot from the bench. She said, Mrs. Calloway, you are 74 years old. You are petitioning for joint guardianship of an 8-year-old child with whom you have no biological relationship and with whom you had no prior relationship before 36 hours ago. Help me understand why I should consider this, Dot said, because the child's great-grandmother believed I was trustworthy enough to put my name in an emergency file 14 years ago. Because her father believed the same thing and put my name in a flash drive with the most important evidence of his life. Because I have been a nurse for 30 years and I understand what children need to heal from harm. And because Lily has a grandfather who is capable and committed and who will be a full partner in her care. And together we provide the stability and continuity that she needs. The judge said, you have no experience with guardianship. Dot said, I have 30 years of experience with children in crisis. I have a stable home in a school district with strong resources. I have no medical conditions that impair my ability to care for a child. I have the full cooperation and participation of her biological grandfather. And I have a girl who asked if she could call me Graham 2 days after meeting me. The judge looked at Lily sitting beside Dot in the courtroom. She said, Lily, you have heard what we have been talking about. Do you understand that a guardian is the person who is responsible for taking care of you, making decisions about your life, making sure you are safe? Lily said, yes. The judge said, how do you feel about living with Mrs. Calloway and your grandfather? Lily looked at Dot. She said, I feel like they are the right people. The judge said, why? Lily thought about this with the seriousness of a child who had been asked to account for something true and wanted to say it correctly. She said, because Graham came in the middle of the night when she did not have to, and Grandpa came when she called, and they did not leave when it got scary. She paused. Daddy always said the people who do not leave when it gets scary are the ones you can trust. The judge was quiet for a moment. She said, that is a good answer. She looked at the documents in front of her. She looked at Wade, at the Iron Cross patch on his cut, at the formal manner he had adopted for the courtroom, without abandoning the essential quality of what he was. She said, Mr. Briggs, you are the child's biological grandfather. You will be the primary daily caregiver. Explain to me your living arrangements. Wade said, I have purchased a house in Nashville, 3 miles from Mrs. Calloway's home. I have closed my residence in Memphis. I run a custom motorcycle repair business, which I intend to establish in Nashville. My income is documented. My schedule is flexible and will be arranged around Lily's school schedule and needs. The judge said the Iron Cross MC. Wade said, is a motorcycle club. It is not a criminal organization. It is composed primarily of veterans and working men who ride together. Several members are known to federal law enforcement as having cooperated with the investigation that led to the arrests of Captain Decker and Deputy Hargrove. The judge said, I have read the FBI summary. Wade said, then you know we did the right thing. She looked at him for a moment. She said, yes, I do. She looked back at her documents. She said, the previous guardianship document issued to Cole Hargrove has been voided by this court in light of the documented fraud in its procurement. The court accepts the petition for joint emergency guardianship submitted by Dorothy Margaret Calloway and Wade Allen Briggs to be reviewed at 6 months for conversion to permanent status. She looked at Lily. She said, "Lily Renee Briggs, this court is placing you in the care of two people who have demonstrated in an extreme and chaotic situation that they are willing to do whatever it takes to keep you safe. I expect you to let them." Lily said, "I will." The judge said, "Good." She made a notation. Then she looked up again. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, one more thing." Dot said, "Yes." The judge said the complaint filed by Officer Marcus Calloway against Captain Decker. The United States Attorney's Office has indicated it will be included in the formal record of the prosecution as evidence of the duration and scope of the corrupt operation. Officer Calloway's file will be updated to reflect the complaint and its fraudulent suppression. She paused. She said, "It is not enough. I understand that, but it is what the law can do right now." Dot said, "I understand." She meant it. She was a practical woman, and she understood the limits of official acknowledgement. But she was also a mother, and there was a weight that shifted slightly in her chest at the knowledge that the record would say, in however formal and impersonal a way, that her son had seen something wrong and said so, and had been right. That it would say, "He tried." She said, "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge said, "Court adjourned." Outside the courthouse, the Nashville October was doing what October did in Tennessee, gold and clean and cool the air, carrying the particular quality of a season that knew it was the last good one before the cold came in. The steps of the courthouse caught the afternoon light and held it. Wade stood beside Dot. Lily stood between them, holding his hand, with her right hand the cast arm against her side. 3 members of Iron Cross were parked across the street, their bikes quiet, waiting to see how it came out. When Lily appeared at the top of the courthouse steps, one of them lifted a hand. Lily lifted her cast arm slightly, the gesture of someone learning a new language. Dot said, "You will need to figure out the dog situation before you move in." Wade said, "What dog situation?" She said, "Claire wrote it down." Lily said she wanted a dog. Lily said, "I said eventually." Dot said eventually has a way of arriving faster than people plan for. Wade said, "I know nothing about dogs." Dot said, "I will teach you." He looked at her. He said, "You know about dogs." She said, "I know about dogs, motorcycle riding, child guardianship law, emergency medicine, and feeding people who show up unexpectedly. I have had a productive 36 hours." He almost smiled. This time it went all the way. Lily looked up at both of them. She said, "Can we go home now?" Dot said, "Yes, let us go home." They went down the courthouse steps together, 3 people who had arrived at this particular moment from different directions in different losses, and would now proceed in the same one. The bikers across the street started their engines, a low rumble of acknowledgement, and fell in behind them as they walked toward the parking lot in the Nashville October afternoon. In the months that followed, the Decker trial moved through its process with the methodical slowness of federal proceedings, each piece of documentation examined, each witness heard, each argument made and countered across a long, careful distance. Webb's team was thorough. The audio recordings were admitted, the annotated complaint was admitted, the financial records were admitted. 4 additional officers pleaded guilty in exchange for cooperation. Hargrove received his verdict in the spring. Decker's trial was still pending when the next autumn arrived, but the outcome was not in significant question. The house on the east side of Nashville adapted to its new configuration the way houses did gradually and without announcement, acquiring the particular lived-in quality that came from people moving through it with intention rather than just occupying its rooms. Lily started school in November, late in the semester, which the principal had been matter-of-fact about, saying they had handled harder transitions, and that Lily should come when she was ready, and they would meet her where she was. She was quiet for the first 2 weeks, watching the classroom with those flat, careful eyes, mapping the territory before committing to it. By the 3rd week, she had identified a girl named Pearl, who liked the same books, and they had begun eating lunch together. By December, she was raising her hand in class. The therapist was a woman named Sandra, who worked out of an office on West End and had a manner that was neither overly warm nor clinical, but steadily present the way good medical staff were steady. Lily said after the second session that Sandra did not say dumb things. Dot took that as a positive indicator. Wade moved into his Nashville house in early November and spent the first 2 weeks there organizing it by function, making it orderly without making it formal. He set up his garage as a workshop before he set up his bedroom, which Dot found revealing and did not say so. He was there when Lily came home from school on the days Dot had her standing appointments, and Lily had accepted this arrangement with the equanimity of a child who had decided that reliability was more important than any specific geography. The formal complaint of Officer Marcus D. Calloway was entered into the official record of the United States District Court for the Western District of Tennessee on a Tuesday morning when Dot was at Lily's school for a parent conference. Her phone buzzed with a message from Webb that said simply, "It is in the record." She read it in the parking lot and sat for a moment, and then went inside because Lily's teacher was waiting, and Lily was doing well in reading, and there was a conference to attend. Later at home, she stood in the kitchen and looked at the photograph on the wall. She said, "It is in the record." She had acquired the third chair by then. Lily had chosen it herself from a furniture store in East Nashville, a wooden chair with a slightly wobbly leg that they had decided to keep unrepaired because Lily said it made it special. The dog had arrived in February, a terrier mix named Sergeant, that Lily had named herself, and that had immediately attached itself to Wade with the particular devotion of a small dog for a large man. He spent most of his time in Wade's garage when Wade was there, and at the foot of Lily's bed when he was not. Lily had nightmares through the winter less frequently as the weeks passed. Dot learned the specific geography of her fear, the sounds and smells and angles of light that could trip it, and learned to navigate around them the way she had learned to navigate around difficult terrain, carefully and with attention, and without pretending the terrain was not there. On Sunday mornings, the Iron Cross sometimes gathered in Dot Street, their bikes lined along the curb, the sound of them carrying through the neighborhood with the comfortable certainty of something that had been explained and accepted. The neighbors had opinions, and then they did not. After a morning when 3 bikers helped the family at the end of the block move a tree that had come down in a storm, Lily learned to braid Dot's hair on a Saturday afternoon in March, sitting behind her on the sofa with the focused concentration of someone learning a skill, her cast long gone and her wrist healed to full function. She said she was practicing for when she had longer hair. She said she was practicing for a lot of things. Dot let her practice. That was what you did. You let people practice the things they were learning to do. You stayed available. You held the shape of things until other people could hold their own. On the evening in December, when the first snow of the season came in off the Cumberland Plateau and covered Nashville in 2 inches of white, Dot was at the kitchen table with her reading glasses and paperwork from Claire regarding the 6-month custody review when Lily came downstairs in her pajamas and stood in the kitchen doorway. She said, "Graham, I cannot sleep." Dot said, "Nightmare." Lily said, "Not exactly." She came to the table and sat in the wobbly chair. "I was thinking about Daddy." Dot said, "What were you thinking?" Lily said, "I was thinking about whether he knew how it was going to turn out, with you and Grandpa. Whether he knew when he put your name in the drive that this was what would happen." Dot said, "I do not think he knew exactly. I think he hoped there were people in the world who would do the right thing if it was put in their hands. And he picked the people he had reason to think were that kind of people." Lily said, "He picked you because of Grammy Margaret." Dot said, "Yes," Lily said, "and he picked me because I was safe." Dot said he picked the safest place he knew. Lily looked at the table. Then she said, "I think he was scared." Dot said, "I think so too," Lily said, "but he did it anyway." Dot said, "Yes, he did." The kitchen was quiet. The snow outside the window made the nightlight a particular blue-white. The dog had come in from his spot in the living room and settled under the table near Lily's feet. Lily said, Do you think he knows how it turned out? Dot thought about this carefully. She was a practical woman and not given to easy comfort or comfortable untruths. But she was also a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms where the limits of the material world were very present, where people in their final hours reached for things she could not measure but could not entirely dismiss. She said, "I do not know. I think the things people do while they are here go on after they are gone. The choices they make, the care they put in the things they set up for other people, that goes on. In that sense, he knows because we are the evidence of what he did." Lily sat with this for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." She got up from the wobbly chair. She said, "I am going back to bed." Dot said, "Sleep well." Lily went back upstairs. The dog followed her. Dot sat at the kitchen table with her paperwork, and the snow outside the window, and the particular quiet of a house that held sleeping people, and a dog, and all the ordinary freight of a life that had room in it. She thought about Marcus. Not the photograph version, the version that called on Sunday evenings and talked about food, and said things carefully because he had learned from her to be careful with words. The version that was 23 years old and writing a formal complaint in precise language, trying to do the right thing through the channels that were supposed to work. She thought about Kevin Briggs, who had sewn a flash drive into a child's dress and put a nurse's name in a text file and trusted that some things eventually found their way to the right place. She thought about Margaret Briggs, 70 years old in a hospital room, who had written a nurse's phone number into a file for a grandchild who did not exist yet, because she believed some people were worth trusting and the world needed them to be reachable. Long chains of care passing through hands, arriving in strange configurations, not clean or efficient or in any way what anyone had planned, but arriving. She stood and looked at the photograph on the wall. Her son in his dress uniform, 26 years old, grinning with the brightness of conviction. The record now said his name. The record now said he had tried. She turned off the kitchen light. She went upstairs. Outside, the snow was still coming down on Nashville, quiet and persistent, covering the ordinary geography of the city in white that would not last, but was, while it was here, complete. 5 years later, on a Saturday morning in October that carried the particular gold of that season in Tennessee, Dot stood on her front porch with a cup of tea and watched Lily come up the walk from the school bus stop. She was 13 now, taller than she had been, her dark hair pulled back, her backpack slung over one shoulder, moving with the particular ease of a young person who had learned that the world was mostly navigable. Behind Lily, at the curb, 3 Iron Cross riders were parked, their arrival coinciding with Lily's, as it often did on Saturday mornings when the club rode through the neighborhood. One of them, Garrett, lifted a hand in greeting. Lily lifted hers back with the natural ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She came up the porch steps and stood beside Dot and looked out at the street. She said, "Garrett says Grandpa is 5 minutes behind." Dot said, "He texted me the same." Lily looked at the tea in Dot's hands. She said, "Can I have some?" Dot said, "There is a pot inside." Lily went in. The screen door closed behind her with the particular sound of a door that had been opened and closed many times by someone who lived in the house and knew its weight. Dot looked at the street. The October light was doing what October light did, lying flat and gold across everything, making ordinary things look like they had been specifically arranged to catch it. She thought about the phone ringing at 11:47 on a Tuesday. She thought about the drive to Memphis in the dark. She thought about a small orange flash drive and a child who had kept it safe because her father told her to. She thought about a man named Wade Briggs who had come when she called. She thought about the photograph on the kitchen wall and the record that now said her son's name, and the formal acknowledgement that would never be enough and was something. Wade's Harley came around the corner at the end of the street and pulled to the curb. He cut the engine and came up the walk, nodding to Garrett as he passed. He climbed the porch steps and stood beside Dot, and she handed him her cup of tea. He drank some of it and handed it back. He said, "How is she?" Dot said she had a good week. "Sandra says she is doing very well." He said, "And the history project?" Dot said, "She is doing it on your unit. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. She asked Webb for the official record of Marcus's commendations last week. Wade was quiet for a moment. He said, "She did not tell me that. Dot said she wanted to surprise you." He looked at the street. He said, "She is going to be all right." Dot said, "She is already all right. She is also going to keep getting more all right. Those are different things." He looked at her. He said, "You know what I mean." She said, "I know what you mean, yes. She is going to be all right." The screen door opened. Lily came out with her own cup of tea and stood on the other side of Dot, the three of them on the porch in the October morning, with the bikes at the curb and the gold light on the street, and the particular ordinary weight of a Saturday that had nowhere urgent to be. Lily said, "Are we doing the farmer's market?" Dot said, "If you want." Lily said, "I want." She paused. "Can we get that bread?" Dot said, "We always get that bread." Lily said, "I just wanted to make sure it was still the plan." Dot said, "It is still the plan." Lily leaned slightly against Dot's shoulder the way she had learned to do over years of Saturdays, the natural weight of a person who knew they were in a safe place. Dot did not move. She just stood there on her porch in the October morning and felt the weight of it, which was not heavy at all. It was the weight of the thing that Margaret Briggs had set in motion with a phone number written on the back of a business card, and that Kevin Briggs had continued with a flash drive sewn into a hem, and that Marcus Calloway had reached toward with a careful complaint written in a language designed to be believed. All of them trying to protect the things they loved. All of them passing it forward. All of it arriving here on a porch in Nashville on a Saturday morning in the shape of a girl leaning against an old woman's shoulder, while the October light lay gold across everything. Dot put her hand on Lily's arm gently, the way you touch someone you had learned the specific geography of knowing where the old places were and how they had healed. She said, "Let us go get the bread." And they went. Outside the hospital, the pre-dawn air was cold enough to carry its own weight. The sky to the east had gone from black to deep gray, the first suggestion of a sun not yet committed. The parking structure smelled like exhaust and wet concrete, and the particular chill of open spaces in October. Dot stood at the edge of the covered walkway and watched the bikers move. There was a precision to it that she had not expected. They did not mill or cluster. They moved in pairs to their machines, checked them with the quick economy of men who maintain their equipment, not from vanity, but from the understanding that equipment failure in the wrong moment costs lives. They spoke to each other in low voices. Two of them had moved to the structure entrance and were watching the approach road without being asked. Wade appeared beside her. He was carrying Lily, who had been discharged over Dr. Paulson's quiet protest and the signed acknowledgement that Dot was assuming medical responsibility, a document the doctor had provided, along with a look that said he understood exactly what was happening and had decided not to see it. Lily was wrapped in a hospital blanket over her gown, her cast arm held against her chest, her head against her grandfather's shoulder. She was watching the motorcycles with an expression that had moved past fear into something that resembled careful wonder. Dot said, "How do we do this?" Wade said, "You ride with me. Lily rides with Ronnie." He nodded toward a man in his early 50s who had the particular quality of stillness that came from being very good at something for a very long time. Ronnie had a face like weathered fence post and hands that looked like they had done honest work every day for 40 years. He saw Dot looking at him and gave a single nod, the kind that communicated, "I understand what I am being trusted with." Dot said, "I have never ridden a motorcycle." Wade said, "You do not have to do anything except hold on and lean with the bike. Do not fight the lean." She considered this. She had driven ambulances at speed through urban traffic and stood at the head of trauma tables while people died, and been present in rooms where the particular violence of bodies failing had filled every sense. She was not easily frightened. But there was something about the idea of putting herself on a motorcycle at 4 in the morning on a Tennessee highway that touched a different kind of uncertainty. She said, "Where are we going?" Wade said, 40 miles north. There is a property off Route 70 belongs to a man named Earl Dixon. He runs a machine shop, closed Tuesdays. Big building, private road. Nobody goes there at night. We have used it before. Dot said, used it for what? Wade looked at her with those flat gray eyes. He said, for situations that needed to be handled somewhere other than public. She said, are we in that kind of situation? He said, before this is over, yes. Jessica Mercer came through the walkway door behind them. She was carrying her CPS bag and her blazer and a foam cup of coffee from somewhere, and her face had the look of someone who had been awake for too long, making too many decisions. She said, I cannot come with you. If I leave the county with an open case and a child I am meant to be supervising, I will be filing paperwork for 6 months. But I want you to know that whatever is on that drive, whatever Kevin Briggs found, I am going to be making my own calls today. There are people at the state CPS office who have not been corrupted yet. I think, Dot said. You said, I think, with a notable lack of confidence. Jessica said, that is an accurate reflection of my certainty level. She looked at Lily in Wade's arms. That little girl needs a real guardian, someone who actually wants her and can provide stability. She looked at Dot. You called yourself her medical contact tonight. Dot said I did. Jessica said, that gives you standing. It is thin standing, but it is standing. If you were to petition for emergency guardianship while the abuse investigation is pending, a judge would have to hear it. She paused. I know one in Davidson County. She hears cases out of Nashville. She is fair. Dot said, we will be in touch. Jessica said, be careful. She looked at the bikers moving through the structure. All of you. She turned and went back through the walkway door. Dot looked at the flash drive in her coat pocket. She could feel the edge of it through the fabric. She said to Wade, when we get where we are going, we need to look at what is on this. He said, I know. He looked at it. He said, Kevin was careful. Careful enough that I did not know the drive existed until 20 minutes ago. Whatever he put on it was worth hiding from someone. Dot said, worth dying for if you are right about the accident. The words sat between them for a moment. Two people standing in a parking structure in the dark. Their children gone, and this child between them, and something on a small orange drive that might explain why. Wade said Marcus was a good Marine. Dot said he was a better son. Wade said, I know. He told us. He said it not often, but when he did. He said that the person he most wanted to be like when he was grown was his mother, and she would not let him say it too much because she said it made her feel old. Dot looked at the gray sky beyond the structure opening. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, well, let us go see what Kevin Briggs left behind for us to find. She walked out to where Ronnie was waiting with his bike, and she let him explain how to sit and where to put her hands and how to feel the lean and move with it rather than against it. She listened the way she had always listened to instruction, completely and without ego, because she had learned a long time ago that the thing that killed people in emergencies was the assumption that they already knew enough. When the engine started, the sound of it moved through the structure and out into the Tennessee morning like something announcing itself. Lily, sitting in front of Ronnie with the blanket tucked around her, and Wade's hand on her shoulder for the last moment before they moved, looked up at the sound of all those engines, and something in her face opened. She said, it sounds like thunder. Wade said, it is just motorcycles, little bird. Lily said, I know, but it sounds like thunder that is on your side. Wade looked at the bikers falling into formation. He looked at Dot on the back of his own bike, her hands finding the grip points, her back straight, not leaning into it yet, but not fighting it either. He looked at the exit of the structure and the empty road beyond. He thought about a Marine named Marcus Calloway, who had died in a country far from here and had asked his brothers to watch over the people he left behind, and how watching over people sometimes meant riding into the dark before the sun decided to show up, and how you did it anyway, because some debts did not expire with the person who made them. He put the bike in gear. The convoy rolled out of the parking structure at 4:23 in the morning, 34 motorcycles in formation on an empty Memphis street, their engines speaking to the cold air and the empty buildings, and the first gray light of a day that was going to ask more of all of them before it was done. Dot held on and felt the lean and moved with it the way she moved with most things she had not chosen, but had learned to navigate with the particular competence of a woman who had lived through enough to understand that survival and suffering were not opposites, that you could be both at once, and that what mattered most was not whether you were afraid, but whether you kept moving anyway. The highway opened up ahead of them. The engines rose to meet it. Back at the machine shop while Lily slept, and the documentation spread across the card table, Dot and Wade worked through Kevin's files with the methodical attention that the material demanded. The more she read, the more she understood the shape of what they were dealing with. This was not a single corrupt officer taking advantage of his position. This was a system, small but durable, built over years with the particular architecture of people who understood how institutions worked and how to use that understanding to stay hidden. Decker had been careful. The gaps in the seizure records were consistent enough to be systemic, but small enough that any single instance looked like clerical variance. The money moved through front companies that had legitimate business activities. The notation on Marcus's complaint was the kind of mark a person made without thinking, the casual arrogance of someone who had been doing something unchallenged for long enough that they stopped imagining anyone would ever look. That was the thing about people who operated inside systems, Dot thought. They borrowed the legitimacy of the institution and assumed it was permanent. They forgot that institutions were made of people, and people made mistakes, and some of those mistakes got photographed by a 32-year-old city employee who kept very careful records and hid the results in his daughter's dress. Wade watched her work through the files with the attention of someone who was trying to understand something from the outside that she was reading from the inside. He said at one point, "You read financial documents like you read patients." She said, "I read them like evidence. Every document tells you something about the person who made it." The annotation on Marcus's complaint, that single line that is a man who had been doing this so long, he did not even stop to think about what he was leaving behind. He just marked it and moved on, because he had marked 100 things before it, and nothing had ever come back. Wade said, "And now it is coming back," she said, 30 years late and through channels nobody anticipated. "But yes," he said. "Does that feel like enough?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the photograph of the complaint at the margin note in tight block print. She said, "It feels like what there is. Enough is a different question." He said Marcus deserved better than this. She said, "Yes, he did. So did Kevin. So did every person Decker suppressed or scared into silence or had hurt to keep quiet. They all deserve better than having to wait this long for the record to say they were right." She closed the file. She said, "But the record is going to say it. That is not nothing." He looked at her. In the dim light of the machine shop, with the heater hissing and his granddaughter sleeping in the corner, he looked at Dorothy Calloway and understood something about her that he had been working toward since she said her son's name on the phone in the dark. The particular quality of people who had been through the worst things and had not let those things make them smaller. Marcus had said his mother was the toughest woman he ever knew. Wade had understood that as a description of hardness. Standing in this machine shop at dawn, he understood it differently. He understood it as a description of endurance, with the softness still intact, which was a different and rarer thing entirely. He said, "I am glad you answered the phone." She said, "I almost did not." He said, "What made you answer?" She looked at the sleeping bag in the corner where Lily slept. She said, 30 years of learning that the calls you almost do not answer are always the ones that matter." Outside the building, the sky had gone fully light. The federal units would be there in a few minutes. The machine shop would become a crime scene, and then a memory, and then nothing in particular, just a building north of Memphis where something important had happened once. But right now, it was still theirs, and the flash drive was still in Dot's coat pocket, and the evidence inside it was still whole, and somewhere in Nashville, an FBI agent was getting out of bed to take a call that would change the trajectory of several lives. Dot looked at the sleeping child and thought about a woman named Margaret, who had been careful enough to write a phone number on the back of a business card, and foresighted enough to know that care, the specific kind that stayed and showed up and did not disappear when things got hard, was the rarest and most necessary thing in the world. She thought Margaret Briggs had been exactly right. The drive from the machine shop north to the county road junction passed through territory that was neither city nor countryside, but the particular in-between of rural Tennessee, scattered farms and equipment yards, and the occasional gas station with its lights too bright for the hour. Dot watched it through the passenger window and thought about the particular way evidence accumulated, how it was never one large thing, but always many small things. A margin notation here, a subfolder there, a recording made in a jacket pocket by a man who understood that the only way to fight an institution was to document what the institution preferred undocumented. She thought about Marcus doing the same thing at 23, writing his complaint in precise language, numbering the incidents, including dates and dollar amounts, doing everything correctly because he had been raised by a woman who believed that if you were going to say something, you should say it so clearly that misunderstanding required effort. And then, watching it disappear. She understood better now why he had enlisted. Not because the Marines were simpler than city politics, though perhaps they were in certain respects, but because the Marines had a chain of accountability that went somewhere. When you reported something wrong in the Marines, it went up a chain that led somewhere other than a paper archive that was not going to be digitized. When you died in the Marines, the record said so. The record was specific about what you did and what it cost. The record had not been specific about what Marcus did as a police officer. Not for 8 years. Wade said from the driver's seat, "You are very quiet." She said, "I am thinking." He said, "About." She said, "About how much energy people spend protecting the wrong things. The institution instead of the people. The record instead of the truth." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Kevin said something like that once. He said that corruption was not about bad people. It was about systems that made it easier to protect the wrong things and the right ones. He said if you made it hard enough to do the right thing, eventually even basically decent people started doing the wrong thing, just because it was easier." Dot said, "And Decker was never basically decent." Wade said no. Decker was the kind of person who made the system work for him, who understood that institutions protect themselves before they protect anything else, and use that understanding as cover. She said, "Until Kevin." He said, "Until Kevin." He was quiet for a moment. "Until my son sat in an archive room and found a paper complaint that was supposed to stay buried, and photographed it and kept going." The road ahead was open and straight for a long stretch. The sky was fully light, now pale October blue, with some cloud moving from the west. Dot said he was brave. Wade said he was afraid. He told me that. He said he knew what it meant that someone had gotten to the original complaint and buried it. He knew it meant someone inside the system had specific knowledge and specific reach. And he kept going anyway. She said, "That is the definition." He said, "I know. I just wish I had told him that more clearly when he was alive to hear it." The words settled into the truck cab with the particular weight of things said too late in the wrong direction. Dot looked at her hands in her lap and thought about all the things she had not said to Marcus in time, all the conversations she had assumed they would have later in that indefinite future that turned out to have a specific and premature end. She said, "We say it by being here, doing this. That is what we have." He looked at her. He said, "Marcus would have liked you." She said, "He did like me. I was his mother." He almost smiled. He said, "I mean, he would have liked the way you are right now, the way you were in that hospital." He used to say the thing he respected most in a person was the ability to be fully present in a hard situation without spending energy managing how they appeared. He said most people could not do it. They were always half attending to how they looked in the room. You do not do that. She said, "I stopped worrying about how I looked in rooms somewhere around year 10 of emergency nursing. You either develop that or you do not last." He said he would have said exactly that back to me. She said, "He was my son. He learned it somewhere. The county junction came up and the truck turned north toward Nashville. And behind them, the machine shop and the federal vehicles and the accumulated evidence of a 6-year operation receded into the morning. In the back seat, Lily was awake. She had been awake for the last several miles watching the road, not saying anything. Now she said, "Graham." Dot turned. Lily said, "Do you think Daddy was scared when he made the recording? The one where he talks to you?" Dot said, "Yes, I think he was." Lily said, "He sounds like he is trying to be calm." Dot said, "That is what being scared sounds like when you are trying to do something important. You do not stop being scared. You just make your voice do what needs doing anyway." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was scared in the machine shop. When those cars came." Dot said, "I know. So was I." Lily said, "You did not sound scared." Dot said, "I had more practice." Lily thought about this. She said, "When does it stop being hard?" Dot said, "The hard things do not stop being hard. You just get more tools for them, more practice, more people around you who have their own tools and their own practice." She paused. "That is what your grandfather's club is in part. People who have been through hard things and have tools and are willing to share them." Lily looked out the window. She said, "That is why he does not leave his people behind." Dot said, "Yes," Lily said, "and we are his people now, you and me." Dot looked at Wade. Wade kept his eyes on the road, but something in his jaw shifted, a slight easing of the tension he had been carrying since 4 in the morning. Dot said, "Yes, we are his people, and he is ours." Lily appeared satisfied with this. She settled back against the seat and looked out the window at the Tennessee morning, passing by the fields and the farm roads, and the ordinary rural landscape of a state that held its history close and its troubles closer. And she watched it with the eyes of a child who was beginning slowly and with reason to understand that the world had more safe places in it than she had believed. The Claire Holden meeting at Dot's kitchen table lasted 2 hours and produced a stack of documents that would take the rest of the week to process through the appropriate channels. Claire was efficient and thorough and had the particular quality of a good family lawyer, the ability to see the human situation clearly while also seeing the legal architecture that surrounded it, and to work both simultaneously without losing track of which was which. She said at one point, looking at Dot over the top of her reading glasses, "I have to ask, you understand that what you are taking on is not temporary, even if the first documents say emergency. If this conversion happens at 6 months, if the permanent order comes through, you are committed to this child's life for the duration." Dot said, "I understand that." Claire said, "You are 74 years old." Dot said, "You are the second person to tell me that today. I am aware of my own age." Claire said, "I am not questioning your capacity. I am doing my job. The court will ask you how you plan to provide for Lily's long-term stability given your age. You need an answer that is specific and realistic." Dot said, "The answer is Wade Briggs, who is 58 years old and healthy and committed and will be the primary day-to-day guardian as I age. The answer is that we are building a joint structure, not a single dependent one. And the answer is that Lily has a network of people around her who know her and are invested in her well-being." Claire looked at Wade. Wade said, "I have already contacted my accountant about establishing a trust structure for Lily's education and ongoing care. My business in Nashville will be solvent within 6 months. I own my property outright." Claire wrote something down. She said, "The court will also want to see that Lily's therapeutic needs are being addressed. There are trauma histories here that will require professional support for years." Dot said, "We have a therapist already identified. We made an appointment this morning from the hospital waiting area." Claire looked at her over the reading glasses again. She said, "You made a therapy appointment from a hospital waiting area during a custody crisis." Dot said, "I had 40 minutes while Wade was with Lily. It seemed like a good use of the time." Claire set down her pen. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, I have been doing this work for 23 years. I have never had a client make a therapy appointment during the acute phase of a custody crisis." Dot said, "Was it the wrong thing to do?" Claire said, "No. It was exactly the right thing to do. She picked up her pen again. It is just not what I usually see. Dot said I was a nurse for 30 years. You do not wait until the crisis is resolved to start addressing the secondary effects. You run them in parallel. Claire said, I see. She wrote something else. Then she looked at the documents in front of her and said, all right, I think we have enough to proceed. The petition is strong. The FBI involvement actually helps here because it establishes that the previous guardianship arrangement was fraudulent at its roots, which removes the question of competing legitimate claims. She paused. Judge Reardon is fair. I have appeared before her many times. If you present yourselves the way you have presented yourselves to me today, I think you will be heard. Dot said, what does heard mean in practical terms? Claire said, it means she will not dismiss this because of your age or because of Mr. Briggs's background. It means she will look at what is actually in front of her. What is actually in front of her is a child who was systematically harmed by a person who had no legitimate claim to her, who has spent her first 8 years losing every adult who was supposed to protect her, and who has now found 2 people who drove through the night and faced down a federal corruption operation to keep her safe. That is a story that a fair judge can hear. Dot said, and if the judge is not fair, Claire said, then we appeal. But I do not believe that will be necessary. Wade said from the other side of the table, you seem confident. Claire said, I am realistic. There are no guarantees. But the facts here are unusually clean for a case of this complexity. The previous guardian is in federal custody. The documentation of abuse is medical and undeniable. The FBI has cleared both of you of wrongdoing in connection with the events of last night. Lily herself is articulate and composed and will be heard directly if the judge chooses to speak with her. She paused. She will choose to speak with her. Judges always do in cases involving older children. She began gathering her papers. She said, I will file the petition today. The hearing will be set within 48 hours, given the federal urgency designation. Get some sleep if you can, both of you. After Claire left, the house was quiet for a time. The federal agents maintained their perimeter outside. Lily was asleep again on the sofa, under a blanket Dot had found in the hall closet. Sergeant, the dog, not yet in existence, but the space on the cushion beside her already shaped like something waiting to be filled. Dot washed the teacups. She dried them and put them back in the cabinet. She stood at the kitchen sink and looked out the window at the backyard and the fence line and the oak tree going gold at its edges. Wade came to stand in the kitchen doorway. He leaned against the frame and looked at her. He said, you should sleep. She said, I know. He said, you will not. She said, probably not. She turned from the window. She said, you should though. One of us should be rested for the hearing. He said, I have not slept before something important in 30 years. Not before deployments, not before court dates, not before any of the times when being awake felt like the only useful thing I could do. She said, that is something we have in common then. He said, Marcus said you were like that you could go 3 days on 4 hours and still run a floor. He said it like it was something to be proud of and something to worry about at the same time. She said he was right on both counts. She moved from the sink to the table and sat down. He came and sat across from her. The kitchen was quiet around them, the ordinary, domestic quiet of a house in the middle of the day with people resting. She said, when this is done, when the hearings are finished and the structure is in place and Lily is in school and the trials are running their course, what do you do? He said, I do this. What I said in the hearing, I run the shop. I learn how to be a grandfather who is present instead of absent. I learn what Lily needs. He paused. I learn what you need if you will let me. She looked at him. She said, I am 74 years old. He said, you are the third person to say that today. Despite herself, she laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind that came from a place of genuine surprise, the kind she had not expected to produce in the last 24 hours. He looked at her when she laughed as though he was cataloging the sound of it for future reference. She said, I mean that I am not going to pretend I am not old. I am old. I have limitations that will increase. This is a realistic assessment, not self-pity. He said, I know. I am not asking you to pretend otherwise. I am saying that the realistic assessment of what you are, which includes your age, also includes the rest of it. The 30 years in the drive to Memphis, and the way you read files in a machine shop at dawn, and told a federal corruption captain his own handwriting was on the evidence against him. The realistic assessment is that you are someone worth showing up for. I am saying I intend to show up. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said Marcus would be insufferable about this. Wade said he would absolutely be insufferable about this. She said he would say, I told you so, approximately once a week for the rest of my life. He said, sounds about right. She looked at the photograph on the wall, the young man in his dress uniform grinning, the photograph that had been company in this kitchen for 6 years. She said, all right. She said it plainly the way she said things that were decided. She said, show up then, and we will see what this turns out to be. He said, that is all I am asking. Outside, the October day continued gold and specific and indifferent to the weight of what had happened in it. The agents in the backyard moved through their routines. The neighborhood street held its ordinary Saturday life. And in a kitchen in Nashville, two people who had each lost someone and carried that loss into the same unexpected morning, sat across a table and agreed without fanfare to try.